Star Trek 57, M23, take 2.
It's got Star Trek, Episode 3, the DS9 pilot, Emissary.
Journey beyond the boundaries of charted space, where a dark, mysterious world waits on the threshold of new discovery. Prepare yourself for an adventure beyond imagination. Prepare for the thrilling 2-hour world premiere of Star Trek Deep Space Nine.
7 o'clock on Denver's 2 tonight.
Hey, Jesse. Hey, Jesse.
Hey.
What kind of a noise annoys Steve Oster?
A noisy noise?
Annoys Steve Oster. That's right. Otherwise known as the associate producer of the episode Emissary by DS9.
That's where I've seen that.
Oh, great! So that count we can start then.
Yeah,
that counts as a beginning.
I think so. I think we did it. We did it together.
Somehow you did it.
No, but I had help from other people, and help is just
You prompted Jesse, and he responded.
It's not about the first or the last or the middle. It's about like the cohesive whole. You know what I mean? So
exactly. Star Trek as a whole.
in the butt.
Yes, everybody's got them,
A wormhole.
including Yes, that's a good point.
That's very topical.
I was about to say most aliens, but I don't want to go. I don't want to go out on a limb and say that all aliens have a. Is it anus or rectum? What's the right? Rectum's the inner part. Anus is the starfish part. I can't remember.
Now you got me questioning myself. I'm pretty sure the anus is the outside part because when they
That's what I said. Yeah,
right. Because when they talk about calamari being like cheap calamari not being real calamari or whatever that thing that goes around. I don't know if that's true, but they say it's true.
Yeah, they said they use the pig anus.
Yeah, and they don't say rectum. So
they usually don't say rectum.
I mean,
Sometimes for that particular thing, this is a silly digression, but when you hear that theory, it's like, all right, maybe, I don't know, but it's plausible. Corporations are cheap,
yeah,
and pig anuses presumably are plentiful, right?
Yeah, presumably, yeah, they would.
The other rumor, though, is you hear this rumor.
This is America.
You hear that rumor where they say it's foreskins, and that doesn't make any sense for a whole host of reasons. First of all, I don't even think like an evil corporation would necessarily be all about putting foreskins and passing them off as calamari. So there's that. Then foreskins have got to be expensive. There's got to be a value there for scientific research or something. I don't know. I heard there's a skin cream they make out of foreskins.
Wait, what?
I don't know if that's a real thing either. You know, the French do all sorts of stuff. Anyway, Deep Space Nine, Emissary. That's the episode tonight.
Not to be confused with The Emissary.
Yes, exactly.
Or anus berry.
Which is a different show.
I think a whole nother episode.
We could do a podcast about that.
A whole nother future episode is going to be about show names that are similar, like First Contact, and then the movie there's the episode First Contact, and then the movie First Contact. Come on, people.
Come
Honestly.
on, people.
Come on. Anyway, Deep Space Nine, Emissary. It's the pilot. I really liked it. I mean, I've liked it for a long time. What I don't remember is if I liked it when I first watched it. I remember being into TNG at the time, being really excited about Deep Space Nine. I would have been about 12, I think, when it came on the air.
Wow, really? Where was it then?
Yeah, it was like 1992. It ran concurrent with the last 2 years of Star Trek: The Next Generation,
Which was interesting how
It would have made me 14.
how they wove that into like the plot of the Next Generation. That basically kicked off the start of the show.
Yeah.
was that part of Next Generation where Picard is a Borg, and it's like a side effect of all those actions you always wonder about. You know, it's like on this Death Star, like what happens to all those people that blah blah blah. On the other hand, when this, that, and the other, and the heroes do the thing, and the city blows up, what happens to those people? You know, that's kind of like what this sort of was.
Yeah, and it's a different sort of Star Trek show, and the first thing you see is like Locutus, and you're like, okay, well, this is going to be from a different perspective because that ain't Captain Picard.
Yeah. Well, and
he's being an asshole.
To go back even further, another thing that they did that was very different, not only in terms of Star Trek pilots, but also just Star Trek in general, is they have the text at the beginning. the prologue,
Yeah.
the explanatory text, which is
the crawl or whatever.
yeah, it was almost like a Star Wars crawl, and it was similar in vibe, because it was explaining a little bit about the political background going into the thing.
Yeah.
And then went straight into
It
war.
was much more concise and more
Yeah.
sort of ominous.
Yeah, it was. That's the other thing. It's like the Star Trek that began off very ominously and kind of dark and like.
Yeah, really.
Now this is a result. There's no Roddenberry involved in this, right?
No, he was gone by this point.
And he probably would
Post.
have. And he would have not liked that.
I believe he was. I think he was dead by this point, or certainly.
I think so.
Regardless, he was totally uninvolved in this. He would have. He would not have been. I think a fan of a lot of the decisions that they made because it starts off. One of the main things about this episode, which I find really interesting, is that everybody starts out in conflict with everybody else, right? And not just one-on-one conflicts. There are sort of situational, cultural, philosophical, personality conflicts in multiple different combinations between the different characters, and but at the same time they still come together and they do what they need to do when the time comes. But I mean, to have Sisko, the ostensible, the lead that you're going to follow, immediately be in this sort of bratty conflict with Captain Picard, the person that we love and respect and want to be like. That was I think a pretty darn bold fucking move to do that.
I mean, that whole scene where they were talking together, and it was just that unspoken sort of implied speech that was going on about like, we know what we're really talking about, and like Picard is like speechless about the thing. It's like kind of, you can tell like he's like feels bad about it, but he also knows he has to keep this level of authority and decorum. And Sisko has nothing to lose. He can be a dick to Picard because like, and Sisko, like, this is the only time that the fans are really like allowed to see Picard as being treated like a total asshole, and it's like totally understandable, Normally, it's like if someone treats Picard like a jerk, it's kind of like, oh, fuck those guys. But in this case, you're like, yeah, maybe Sisko is like a little warped with his views, but like it's totally understandable that he would like, be like super pissed off, and like I said, he has nothing to lose, so he can like interrupt Picard and say, "I'll do what I can to the best I can," and be a dick about it. And there's nothing Picard can say because he's already like on the way out, according,
Well, and I fully agree that Sisko's perspective was understandable. From it's jarring to see him fighting with Picard or being so brusque with Picard. But having seen what we saw from his perspective, he doesn't know this guy. He knows he's a respected blah, 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 blah.
Right.
But he only really knows him as, my wife is dead because of this person.
He doesn't know like Geordi. He doesn't know Riker. He doesn't know any of those people.
Exactly.
He just knows that this guy's face looks like the guy,
And he still shakes his hand. He still acts very professionally. He makes it purposely a little awkward, but that seems to be part of his style. He seems to be very aggressive about kind of throwing people off when they first meet him. He acts in the opposite way that they might expect.
You're talking about Sisko.
Sisko, yeah, because Picard probably was expecting, oh, thank you, this is going to be a great job, or whatever. I've been real bored over the Utopia Planitia yards. Kira probably thought he was going to be this arrogant, telling her what to do, and he was
amused.
And he was just kind of looking at her. Half the time he didn't even say anything to Kira. He just kept staring at her while she talked.
Well, and then Ducat, when they met up with Ducat for the first time, like, I don't know if he acted in the way, I don't even know if he acted in the way the opposite they expected, but that was interesting because whereas like with Picard, it was all this sort of implied speech. With Ducat, it was more just kind of like, it was like veiled threats, basically, just aggressive double speak the whole time for that. So, but it was still along the same lines of like, Sisko putting on this front. You could chill.
Like you only see Captain Picard. You don't see anybody else from the Enterprise. Even when like O'Brien is saying goodbye, it's only you don't see anybody that from the other show that anybody knows. It's like Picard is like the the sort of like the abstract symbol of the Enterprise, the figure of the Enterprise. That's all you get, like, and then the Enterprise goes away.
I'm trying to think of who.
And then the show starts.
Yeah, there was really nobody else other than O'Brien and Picard, like, in that scene.
Yeah. O'Brien apparently has a favorite transporter room. I guess I didn't know about that.
So-
transporter room number 3.
So I know they were trying to be cute. I know they often went to transporter room 3. 3 in
That's my
writing.
favorite one.
In TV writing, they always talk about 3. It's not just the rule of threes. The number 3 is just it's an inoffensive number. So that's why they always say, holodeck 3, transporter room 3, deck 3,
Oh,
shuttle bay
interesting.
3. It's very common to do that, right? So O'Brien was often in that room, but I found it almost a little condescending, for Picard to be like, "Oh, this is your favorite."
Yeah, right.
And O'Brien, I know I'm
your
imagining
favorite screwdriver that she used?
I'm totally imagining it, but it almost like he had a look like, "Fuck you, man."
Well, yeah.
I'm glad I'm out of here, man. You don't respect me,
Well, yeah.
stupid transporter chief. I'm gonna go run this whole fucking station, you piece of shit.
Yeah, he did go like, it's just a transporter thing, and then Picard was like all just kind of like smiling at him, and then O'Brien's like, okay, can I go now? And Picard just like looks at him for a second and is just like, I'll dismiss you in my own good time. And he's like, okay, good. I know it was meant to sort of be expressed like Picard was just sort of like looking at him, remembering all the good times. Interestingly, do you think there was any relation to when he beams Cisco at the end of the episode from some shit? He clears him for transporter pad C. I noted that it was like at the very end. He says, "Cleared, Cisco. You're cleared for transporter pad C." I can't remember what
That's
they were
the
transporting
alphabet
him.
version of the number 3.
Right. Not only is it the third letter, but it also rhymes with 3. I thought that.
Yeah, word.
I mean, it could have just totally been like, not a coincidence, but kind of like, oh yeah, by virtue of the fact that 3 is an inoffensive number, C would be, I guess, an inoffensive letter to the alphabet or something. But I think maybe somebody was being
They can't
smart.
say like transporter room P
Transporter and P.
because they'd have to edit it. They'd just be that doesn't sound very good. People would make a joke about it.
Edit it. I mean, first of all the stuff on the Saratoga was pretty fucked up and gloomy, and of course we keep coming back to that later on in the episode.
They had a Vulcan captain.
Yeah, they had the Vulcan captain.
Yeah, he looked like. Was that the one? He looked like John Lithgow. There was like a Vulcan There was like a Vulcan guy.
It's that guy. It's that guy that sort of looks like John Lithgow.
Oh.
I forget what his name is.
the guy who sort of looks like John Lithgow.
You've seen him before in other stuff.
Yeah, but what did he say? He says some kind of shit. Yeah, I don't remember.
He says
And
some
then
stuff.
and then there's like the blue guy. Is he like a version of like the guy that cuts the hair on the Enterprise? Is he the same alien?
Yeah, I think that was the same. I was looking at it, and I think that was the
Same kind of alien?
That was the same kind of alien Patrick was referencing when we were talking about the cage and what kind of alien race would be able to be subservient to the Telosians in the cage. And Patrick was like, "What about that race of
Oh,
people?"
right, yeah,
and then
that's
there was
right.
like the
He did
barber
say
one.
that.
You remember that,
Yeah.
Patrick?
The Bolians.
The Bolians. Is that
Mox.
okay? Yeah. Was it a Bolian?
I think. Well, yeah. It did kind of look like a Bolian in the back. I remember
you
a blue
couldn't see
guy.
like if he had weird hands, but like he
Didn't really
looked.
I didn't
his
really
head
pay
shape
attention.
was similar.
Well, at 3:39, we get like 3 minutes 39 seconds. We get sort of like the first sort of look at weird Cisco because he goes into that sort of sad. That he goes into that first sad speech that they repeat. I think at the end of the episode 2. Well, it's not really a speech. It's just they're dragging him away from his dying wife.
Yeah.
And he's like, damn it, we can't just leave her here.
Yeah.
We can't just leave her here. It's real. Like,
I know, right?
Like, it's a thing. It's real. And so he's like, that was
That
like
was
the
genius.
first moment where it's like he's either like sort of like this sort of like weird, like kind of like wooden kind of guy, but then every once in a while he like breaks into like this emotional.
He's got
part,
these
and he's
outbursts,
Like, these
yeah.
outbursts, and they're so fucking weird.
It is, yeah, because it's all unexpected. Because he acts all kind of, mild mannered, just sort of flat, and then he goes, "Ah."
Yeah. Incidentally, I don't know if I asked this before, but I meant to because it was extra like noticeable in, I can't remember if it was the cage or if it was Where No Man Has Gone Before. But it happens in this, and it's a staple of Star Trek. Why do the fucking consoles always explode? Like, don't they
Yeah.
have fuse boxes at least? Why are they the most, even if they didn't, which would be dumb, why are they the most, like, susceptible part
There was
to
a
outside
lot of,
damage? It's totally like, I mean, that's, I guess
There was
it's-
a lot of just straight up explosions on that Where No Man Has Gone Before.
Yeah,
So,
I mean,
I think it was just going like.
it
That's a
seems
staple of Star Trek.
Yeah, and it seems like it's just strictly for theater. Basically, it's just
Oh,
to show that,
absolutely.
like,
It's drama.
it's like instead of the guy getting punched in the face or shot in the arm, his console, like, zaps.
There's even basically looks every time a Star Trek console explodes, and I think this is still true in up through Discovery. Is there are little I don't know, stones or something, pieces of brick. It looks like it's weird debris that does not look like it came out of a metal, titanium or whatever console. Clearly that's just for whatever. There's girders falling down all over the place. It's a little bit bizarre. But what are you gonna do? It's TV. It's fun.
So I guess this whole, like, what was the name of the ship that all
The Saratoga.
The Saratoga. So this was happening on Stardate 43997, and then 3 years later, it's 43997. I had this written down. 43997. That's when Jean-Luc Picard was kidnapped from the Wolf 365, and then 3 years later at 4637. Has anybody ever, like, really looked into what these star dates mean, like why they bother to include
Yeah,
them?
I mean, there's books where there's some system to it. I not in the original series, but I think by the Next Generation they developed some sort of system to it. I could not tell you what that was. I'm sure some people out there can figure it out.
Does anyone know Google's definition of emissary? You notice it's not Oxford Webster's definition anymore. It's now Google's definition. But
Google's definition.
It's a person sent on a special mission, usually as a diplomatic representative. And did you know that promenade is a paved public walk, typically one along a waterfront at a resort? DS9 is hardly a resort. So, I don't know. They were wishful thinking.
and you call this a mining station?
Oh.
What were
cross
they
the
mining?
streams.
What do you mine out in space?
Okay, I should remember this. They were it was.
Iridium?
It might have been Duridium ore.
Where are they extracting it from?
The planet, I think. This is a whole other debate in the Deep Space
just
Nine
from
circles,
Bajor?
which is why would you have a mining station in space? Wouldn't it be
Right.
problematic to bring the ore up from the planet to the space station? And the Star Trek fans, we love to develop rationale for these types of things. And I believe, it obviously seems not to cost them that much to move stuff. And they were saying maybe they having it up there keeps it away from the Bajorians and the Bajoran terrorists. And so that could be it. Somebody also suggested maybe they're bringing it from like various moons and things too. So it's just a central location.
I never put that together. Did they mention that in the first?
Because you can mine
It's not
from
it's not mentioned in the
other
first
celestial
episode.
bodies, asteroids, and moons and stuff.
They don't even set it up as a mining station in the first episode. That doesn't get
Okay.
revealed until later on.
Okay.
Especially in some of those flashback episodes where you actually see the mining/prison stuff happening, because it's a good spot to put people that you don't want to cause a ruckus if they're causing a ruckus on the planet. Send them to the weird mining station.
Oh, here's where I was getting my dates. So it was 46379.1, and then 3 years later at 46388.2. So there's some similarity in that number. Anyway, that's kind of stupid. Not either here nor there. Why was Jake, when they first introduced Jake, what's the deal with people? Well, like, this is maybe just like a question beyond Star Trek, but why is there like this image of people, like, when they hang out in overalls, they have like one strap on.
Yeah.
What's that all about?
And a fishing rod.
Well, the fishing rod, right, and the one strap. Is there some sort of use to this, or like, is it just like they want minimal amount of straps? It's like someone I remember. He would always have his back shirt untucked when he came home from work. Like, but it was just the back. He would untuck them. Maybe it just came untucked. I don't know, but it was always untucked. It's just like one of those half-ass things. That's like,
Right.
it's just gonna be like that. But with Jake, was it supposed to elicit some kind of, I guess, sort of feeling of like being in New Orleans or something? Like,
Right,
I'm not sure quite like what that was all about. But Speaking of the theme song, though, like, not really, we weren't speaking of that, but like,
You just inserted that.
I was in my head. I was thinking of the theme song and going with the theme of the theme song discussions. It's kind of interesting. This theme song is like less sort of like enterprising and less like sort of like adventure. It's sort of like more like of a passive exploratory sort of like theme. So I don't know.
It is a different sort of music, and
It's very contemplative.
yeah, it's sort of more subtle. It's not like a big old like fanfare. Da, 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 da.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
and that was the direction that Star Trek was. It was moving the more contemplative because
Yeah.
Next Generation there's a fanfare aspect to it. However, it as we heard last week when we played the alternate version, that's like it's like the neo-Nazi version,
yeah.
the fascist version that they did not go with.
Star Trek Galaxy Police.
They went with the more contemplative one. This moves further in that direction, and then of course Voyager coming up is even more so. I think I find Voyager. We'll talk about it next week, but Voyager's thing is a little complicated because it's beautiful but sort of boring and long. And then
I haven't seen that one. That's one I haven't seen, so that'll be a.
yeah, you'll
you
take it.
haven't seen Voyager at all?
I've seen Voyager. I haven't ever seen the pilot. I've seen the pilot for Enterprise, and that was the only Enterprise I ever saw.
Yeah, and you'll see it again.
But I will. Yeah, but like the Voyager pilot will be one I haven't seen. CD's nuts. I like it. Jake was disappointed that the what do you call replicators? Sorry, the replicators weren't working.
Jake was disappointed.
And he was all like, "Dad," like O'Brien was like, "You can have some of them emergency rations," and he was like, "Dad."
Yeah. And Jake, his dad all makes fun of him too.
I know.
He
He's all like, boop, boop, boop.
Yeah, it's you can tell he's all doing that hip thing again, where like it's like where Jake's all like he's like, "Come here, Jake," and then Jake goes,
Yeah.
"Okay," and then he goes, "Okay."
Yeah, he's like, "Okay."
Yeah, I marked
That was also weird.
Weird
it was,
outburst.
it was okay. So now as a father, my immediate reaction, first of all, as a person, was he's mocking his son.
Yeah.
But as a fellow father, I was thinking, oh, that's right. That's the exact proper reaction. Although I don't know, that's probably promoting some sort of toxic masculinity in some small way, which I don't think you can say overall for Sisko. I think Sisko's an awesome dad, and that's a huge difference in his character compared to literally every other Star Trek captain, commander, etc. He has a family. He has a close family. His wife died. He has his son with him. He's very close to his father, as we find out later. Although in this episode he implies his father's dead. He says, "My father used to."
Right.
Well, it was like touching. I thought like they did a good job of, for example, at the end of the episode when he sees Jake and they find each other after not having seen each other. It's just a simple scene of like father and son happy to see each other again. But like it was nice. They did a good job sort of expressing that sort of relationship they had, and sort of like we're in it together kind of situation. So
well, and single father, single black man father, doing a good job taking care of his child. And a lot of those things were not things you would see in the 1990s on television.
yeah.
Especially the early 90s. Yeah.
Especially the early 90s.
That's crazy to think about, like 90s. Like
I know, it's the 90s.
Everyone thought they were all,
1992.
right. Everyone thought they were all like woke or something like that.
Welcome, sir.
Husker Du.
What's going on, man?
Not much, man. I missed all the fun.
No, we've been bullshitting for about 15 minutes.
Oh, okay, cool. I'm excited.
I wasn't
watched
bullshitting.
it. I was like,
I was speaking from my
I watched
heart.
you watch him.
I watched you watch it.
I watched it last night, man, and I was shocked at how good it was. I mean, and how cohesive it was. And I figured that even if they had just canceled it after 2 seasons, I'd be like, man, they could have gone somewhere with it. It wasn't like, they had to like rewrite later. Like I was surprised at how like well thought out it was with like the prophets and
The
different
writing
things.
is fantastic.
It's amazing. I mean, I was really because I love Deep Space Nine, but then I remember season 1 not being as good. But maybe I was biased because I had just watched Encounter at Farpoint, so I was thinking, oh well, this isn't going to be as good, and it's not going to be up to par. And I'm like, this is amazing.
No, Emissary is really fantastic because it starts immediately and everything is defined. And what's really cool about it, since it's Deep Space Nine and they actually had characters evolve over time, everything is there that is not completely, but it's all very different at the end of the show, but everything is there to make that through line complete.
they didn't retrofit it, or like, what is it when they have to retcon? They didn't have to retcon anything,
or
because
even when they did retcon, it still fit because they're good writers.
Yeah.
like with the what happens with Bashir a little later on. I won't spoil it, I guess, in case somebody hasn't heard it, but there are things that you are revealed about characters later that still work in this episode.
No, it didn't. What's revealed about Bashir later, he would have acted the exact same way.
In fact, it helps explain why would this guy
want to do
so
this.
far out.
Exactly.
And he tried to be like, frontier medicine, which is a great scene too.
Why is this guy kind of an asshole?
I didn't think there was anything that was really retconned in such a way where, like on TNG, which I love TNG, it's my favorite show ever of all time, and it probably always will be. But there were things on that where, like, like we were talking about last week about how, like, Geordi was all, like, cool in the first episode and he's just kind of like a geek later. It doesn't.
Yeah.
And I've been watching the first season and I'm like, he's just a cool dude in the first season.
They change a lot about every character, every single character. Data, Riker, Picard, Worf, everybody, their character changes in TNG.
Yeah.
But in a weird way, that doesn't make sense. Geordi's a fantastic example of that.
Even Worf, like
Worf is very like meek, weirdly. They're like, they say it's Worf is almost in Encounter at Farpoint, the first few episodes. Worf is almost a racist.
Yeah,
it's almost here. We'll allow a Klingon, but they have to behave.
Well, what's brilliant also is the way that they made the Ferengi Quark is such a stereotypical Ferengi.
Yeah.
What's brilliant about that is that, like, he gives like the archetype, and then his family isn't really like that.
Yeah, and then neither is he.
Yeah,
and he always has really good like outfits on.
That's true. He does
always
dress fantastically.
Yeah.
Although Cisco's bathing suit outfit is, I mean, I want that.
That shirt.
Yeah, that was a fantastic shirt.
And the little what do you call those swimsuit pants where they're Speedos, but they have
in between?
They're like boxer briefs.
I think they just call them trunks.
Yeah, they were kind of.
But I thought trunks are the
That's what I
floppy
thought.
shorts kind. Like,
I don't know. That's a good question. I always just assumed they just called the floppy ones trunks as like a generic sort of name for them, but the actual trunk was.
Well, we have to find them.
Pretty silly.
If they're not available,
Spunks.
we're going to get a company to make them, and we'll brand them with our logo and sell them.
Ben Cisco's trunks.
They're called Spunk Speedos / trunks.
Are they really called spunks?
I don't know. I just made it up.
He's like looking at his phone like he was.
Oh, no, but
Googling.
It's totally it's
I
totally
took notes
Just
on
swiping
this.
through some
Okay, here are
stuff.
my notes for the show because I don't know what you guys have been talking about. So I said, here's the notes I took throughout the entire show. He said, cool battle shots from different perspective of Borg War, which I thought was cool. Did they? Because they didn't really. Did they? They didn't use stock footage of Patrick Stewart because he was a big part of this episode.
Yeah, he was. Yeah.
They should have used stock footage.
Well, I didn't know. Well,
Just dubbed over with some. Hello,
that would be hilarious.
Captain Cisco.
We'll be
Hello.
seeing you, Miles. Later.
No, because they showed from a different perspective. Well, they could have just said, "I am the Borg" or some bullshit.
Well, like,
that they had on Best of Both
So
Worlds.
the other.
Oh,
so,
word. I see what
You know what I'm saying?
You talk
Like-
about Locutus.
So
Yeah,
I think
Locutus.
we'll continue with the story in a bit, but I think just initially, we got to the very beginning, right after the credits. But I think now we are on the station. We've seen a little bit of it. They've started doing a tour of it.
Okay.
I think a couple things to note are, for example, there are ceilings. And that was a big production difference on TOS and TNG and most of the movies. There were no ceilings on the bridge set and on the hallways, although they had modular ceilings for the hallways and things they could move around. But basically, they couldn't have ceilings because they
You
had
gotta
to
move
have
all those cameras.
Yeah, they had to have the camera cranes and the lighting, and it was a complicated thing. But for Deep Space Nine, the production designer wanted it to feel more lived in and more claustrophobic.
More 90s.
Yeah, more
right?
90s.
It was more like everything was good, so we had to be depressed.
Well,
Now
no.
everything sucks.
Deep Space. To be fair, Deep Space Nine, when it was put into production and when it premiered, things weren't good yet because it was still the Bush years,
that's true.
recession, and stuff.
HW. Yeah,
that happened during the Deep Space Nine.
That's
year.
true.
But when you hear that, when I read that and then went back and started watching episodes, you really pay attention to it. You suddenly realize all their offices, all their rooms have ceilings, and that really looks different compared to the Next Generation, where in the Ready Room and stuff you never would see the ceiling.
It really does. No, I do have some notes on the on when they're first getting on the station, first looking at the station. One thing I noticed, it's a little bit different than set production, but I noticed that they did a really good job of fleshing out that there was already a world going on. Like Kira and Odo kind of already knew each other.
Hell yeah,
and
yeah.
Quark and Odo had like known each other for 4 years, and they've been kind of sparring when it was like a Cardassian station, and I thought that was really like well done. It was like a whole universe was already kind of thought out,
and the Starfleet was sort of interloping into it.
Exactly, and exactly.
Well, and another aspect of the production design that I mean, obviously it's an alien, quote unquote, alien space station, so this is kind of by default. But in all other Star Trek TV shows and basically all the movies, we primarily see them on the ship. When they go off the ship, it's a special little adventure kind of thing, and then they go back to their comfortable ship. And on the ships, there's a chain of command. Everyone works for Starfleet, or they're in the families, but there's an order. There's an understood order of this is how a starship works. Yeah. Maybe captains have slightly different styles, but basically we understand that. In this show, they keep using the direction and like you were saying, like looking at the promenade and stuff to make it very clear. You have these Starfleet people, a few of them surrounded by these other people.
It's a whole living
no control over. They don't have to pay any attention to them. Have to be manipulated into listening to what Starfleet wants to do.
Yeah, like Odo has to deal with this nonsense.
How many? I'm sorry to interrupt.
No. No.
How many Bajorans have we met in Star Trek: The Next Generation before DS9?
Well, we met Ensign Ro. Obviously.
Right? Is that pretty much it? Because it's like that's all you really know about the Bajorans.
There's a few others.
No, there are a few others.
Like
but
some feisty chick with an attitude, and she's got a funny nose.
Well, I'm sure you guys already talked about this, but they were going to weren't they going to cast Ensign Ro to be Kira?
We didn't mention that. The original thought was that Ensign Ro would be transferring there. But I think Michelle Forbes, who played Ensign Ro, either wasn't interested or it didn't work out in the end, so they created a new character. Probably for the best.
I like Kira.
It gave them
Kira's great.
It gave them more, and I really liked Ensign Ro, but I think it gave them more freedom. And also, Ensign Ro's character is very different than Kira. Kira was actually fighting since she was like 8, whereas Ensign Ro got the fuck out of there as soon as she. I mean, she fought for a while and then got out of there and joined Starfleet. Which some Bajorans...
You kind of know where Kira's loyalties are.
Yeah.
And she's not... I mean, she doesn't have a history with Starfleet. She doesn't really want to deal with them, and that kind of works better.
But Ensign Sito was another one from the Lower Decks episode.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
She was Bajoran.
Right, she was.
That's later.
She dies,
later,
right? She dies because she's with Wesley... when they do the thing at the academy, she was on that team.
But she doesn't die there. She dies on the lower.
No. Well, but like
she dies. She goes on a mission.
She redeems herself.
Exactly.
But she redeems herself to Patrick Stewart, to Picard, because Picard's like saying like, I don't trust you. I don't like what you did. But then at the end, he gives this really heartfelt speech about how she was.
So it's not really clear on the ship, like if it is Starfleet rule, or if it is sort of like some other kind of rule. It's like a hybrid.
It's almost a hybrid, yeah.
Yeah. So, but they don't have anything laid out specifically of like which it's supposed to be, and like then the whole Bajoran structure isn't really well defined either. Obviously, the
provisional government.
There's the provisional government, but then there's like
it's like what happened in Iraq.
But then there's also these like interested warring factions too. So how does the provisional government relate to the warring factions? And like,
I think they're not warring yet. They were in the strictest sense.
Not yet. Well, they were under Cardassian rule.
Yeah,
and now they feel she's worried. No, now we're going to be under Federation rule.
Well, they didn't explain. So like, her deal is she admits herself that if the Federation rule fails, everyone is they're going to go into civil war, basically.
Well, later she admits that.
That was that was during her meeting with Sisko. She was like, Sisko's like, well, what happens if the Federation fails? She's like, civil war. But the only one that can bring it together is the Kai. The Kai can just say, everyone be unified, and they're unified. Right. But the Kai won't do that because she's got ulterior motive. She wants to please the prophets. But she didn't. So she I
like that angle. Yeah. This fucking bitch, she just wants to please the prophets.
Yeah, she actually believes
So she tries to guilt trip Sisko, basically, into saying, look, the only way I'll unify the people is if you go bring this shit to the prophets. It's up to you. It's your call. It's like your war. You have to decide whether or not you're ready to actualize your reality.
It's a good point. I mean,
and really, it's just her. Like, she could do it, but she's just trying to play political games with the fucking prophets.
She's
and
walking
guilt tripping
the path
him because she knows he isn't going to he won't let a bunch of people die. So she's like, exploiting that fact about him.
This entire episode is and frankly much of the series is characters manipulating other characters,
Right,
and not even like in a hidden way frequently, in an overt way often, just like here's the deal.
Right, and that's the thing is that's Kai Opaka, and she's actually implied to be one of the good ones. Like it wasn't until later they got that other terrible one.
Oh
She
yeah.
was-
Well, they wrote her out because she's on that planet where she doesn't age. Is that because they didn't?
Yeah.
They thought she was too nice, right? Is that there was not?
The problem was I don't know exactly the motivation behind it, but I do know from a narrative perspective, the way they portrayed her was that yes, if she said to do something, everyone would agree, and then where's the conflict?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
By getting rid of her, they then were able to continue the political conflict.
Yeah.
But, so I guess, and then there's the provisional government.
Yeah.
And then they don't really talk about why the Romulans got pushed out. Did Romulans just kind of run out of shit?
Cardassians.
Oh, I'm sorry, Cardassians.
I thought that,
Cardassians.
but to make one point about what you're talking about, Dan,
Spoonheads.
I thought the Kira was actually really hostile to Cisco being there in the first place, though.
She was,
And then later she kind of warmed up to him being
No, but
there.
She's a feisty Bajoran
No,
chick.
you're totally right.
They got attitude.
Yeah, but that's the
no,
point.
she would. That's why it was a little confusing for me because you're
Yeah.
right. She came up to him and she's like, "We don't want the Federation here. Fuck the Federation. They're shitty. But if you guys fall apart, we're gonna go into
it's
civil
the
war."
complexity of that character. The whole point of that character is that dichotomy, which is on the one hand, she's so glad the Cardassians are gone. That's what they've been fighting for this whole time. She's 100% in favor of the Cardassians being gone. On the other hand, she would rather see her people destroy themselves than be put under the rule of another authority.
So she kind of is for a civil war. She thinks it needs to happen. Maybe
I don't think she's for it. I think she cares less about a civil war than being from her perception, being subjugated by yet another of outside authority.
But then later in the episode, she realizes she can work with the Federation, especially, the whole game changes when they find the wormhole and all this stuff. I mean,
That's true.
It changes.
And she gets to know, Cisco a little bit better and understand his deal more. And so, I mean, I guess some of this is speculation, but to answer your question, Dan, about the authorities, and I believe my understanding is, I forget if this was overt in the episode, but it certainly seemed implied, was that the station is now Bajoran. So the Cardassians fled, I think because, she says we finally fought them off. The impression we get later is they basically
ran out of shit.
they strip mine the whole planet.
right.
There wasn't much because we hear about how they don't have any resources anymore. The station is Bajoran. They've taken it over. However, they just do not have the resources to manage that station. And if they're going to keep it, and if they're going to keep the planet going, they need the resources that the Federation is offering, and it's the best deal. And Kira maybe doesn't entirely agree with that, but it's a thing in your brain. It's like having two conflicting things. You want your people to be safe, but you don't want them.
Right, because it's not really clear that she has any kind of solution other than to just
she doesn't.
She just leave us alone, and if we go through some shit, we'll go through some shit.
Which is another thing that makes this Star Trek different. There are a lot of problems presented that don't have some sort of straightforward solution. Either
that's how life is, right?
Or the solution that they implement tends
to make it worse,
in way more problems down the line.
Yeah. No, yeah, I guess she, but there was also that weird Bajoran dude who looked at Cisco and that spiritual dude who could tell.
Oh,
and he's like, "Oh man, you're the emissary." He didn't say it, but
he kept jumping in and being like, "Hey,"
he's like, "You're the one."
Yeah, the second time
to check out the prophets.
It was funny. The second time you see him, Kira is talking to Cisco, and she's just basically like, "Well, no one can figure out how to talk to the Kai because she rarely sees anyone." And then that weird beardy nerd comes in. He's
I know someone who might be able to.
He's not even part of the conversation.
He's not saying anything.
It's not even a response to what she's saying. He just pops in at that moment and goes, "Oh, Cisco, it's time for you to meet the Kai." So
it's
whoa, that was some good timing.
Well, there's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. They say in the Matrix. That old weird dude was knowing the path.
He knew the path.
And then Kira was walking the path.
But how did he know that they were talking about it at that exact moment? Was he just hanging in the background spying on him the whole time?
He's a peeping Tom.
He's basically...
He's a peeping Tom.
So is he a peeping Tom, or is there some kind of do we ever decide there's no mysticism to the Bajorans? Is there?
Well, no. They're deeply spiritual.
Well, they are spiritual, but is there... It's based upon mostly nonsense, but is there ever...
They can always explain it with sci-fi.
Yeah, they can. You're right.
It's not the first time it's been done in sci-fi, but it's certainly one of the more prominent examples of addressing the issue of religion from the religion, sci-fi science answer. And
Yeah.
they you can kind of pick. They
can
set
choose
it up
either
so that
one.
you can kind of
Yeah.
choose how you want, and they really make the strong argument for, okay, yeah, you can call these people aliens, but they do live in a timeless realm and have all these magical powers. And by the way, consider how different this episode is in terms of writing and structure, completely new narrative structure to Star Trek and everything. Yet how similar in some ways it is to Encounter at Farpoint, because it's still at the fundamental plot is a human being challenged by the gods to defend their quality,
Right.
to defend themselves as a reasonable creature that should be allowed to live. Q does it with Picard.
That's true.
And humanity, the wormhole aliens do basically the same thing with Sisko. It's just with Sisko it takes on a much more personal
There are all these
flavor.
Yeah, all these scenes from his life, these really emotional, even like, him talking to Picard, like all these really visceral moments from his life are just coming back, which I thought was really intense.
I mean, I kept getting reminded, of course, I kept thinking about like the cage and the Telosians and how that episode, the writing on that, they sort of like lay this loose foundation for this whole sort of like all this shit that went down for that race of people,
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like they went with that concept with the Bajorans. Not that the Telosians and the Bajorans are parallel, but just the idea of this civilization of people. They're going through this shit. They got enslaved. Now they're not enslavement, but now they risk civil war. So they really built up this whole point is they build up this whole background that they can build upon. And this writing's like really smart and awesome in that respect, because there's a lot of like balancing factors that go into the whole thing. So it's not all. It's what it doesn't have is it's not fluff. It's not the which is.
Are you talking about in the wormhole? That people in the wormhole?
Everything.
Or
I was
just everything in general.
Just everything in general. But the whole
wormhole.
Bajoran civilization in general is just that whole. It's just they really thought out the background and the motivations of what the Bajorans would be, and sort of like
and the political balance on the planet with the Cardassians.
Exactly.
I wrote a number of times in my notes about just the brilliant exposition, which I know I've been on about in the last episode. But the thing is that I think the best of all the pilots, certainly so far, in terms of conveying information in a natural way that doesn't jump out at you, like the Picard asking Riker about, like, protect me from the children.
Yeah, right. Oh, yeah.
That was weird.
Yeah.
But there's none of that in this whole episode.
Right.
We know Dax is a Trill. We know Bashir was a really good student and could have picked whatever. He's really bright and arrogant. We know all these things about all these people.
We even know that Keiko's not a big fan of the place because he's like, oh yeah, she saw the place.
I did.
And Brian's like, she saw the place and she went on vacation or something. And that could have just been a practical thing.
She went to visit her
couldn't-
mother.
They couldn't get her, or they didn't want to know how to write her in for that episode. But still, it was just kind of like. And then I was actually starting the next episode, and like the first scene with her in it, she's like yelling at O'Brien about like being
How much she doesn't want to be there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But no, but point being is like, yeah, it's kind of this sort of exposition that isn't like jammed down our throats so much.
What I really liked was going back to the people in the wormhole, so to speak, how they can kind of like make you think in the wormhole, how they can make you, they play with your mind and they play with your consciousness. So like what I liked it how like when Dax and Sisko were both initially in there. Dax is seeing this nice, beautiful meadow,
right.
and then Sisko's seeing this really dark, awful place because he's at just a dark,
Yeah, I love that scene. That was
pretty
fantastic.
tight, yeah.
because it kind of showed like
We're standing on a rock face.
yeah, because he's just a dark. He just has a dark.
Can you think of anything more idyllic?
Mindset? Yeah, exactly. And I thought the
He
whole.
looked at her like she was insane.
Well, yeah, but then there was that whole where they were showing like how they show really intense scenes from their memory. Like I remember seeing it when it first aired in 1993, and I watched it and I didn't know what to expect. I remember being disturbed by the Trill scene. When with the Trill, transformation.
It's disturbing.
And it's still, I still was disturbed yesterday when I watched it. Yeah, I was just like, but I liked it.
Well, it's disturbing both physically seeing the worm creature and the metaphysical thought of watching this young woman whose brain is about to like permanently be changed.
Yeah, so he didn't die. I mean, so basically, it would be like you don't die. Your memories, you live forever.
But it's also kind of like you do die because
That's
your
what I couldn't-
personality gets merged with the others.
Yeah.
So your that previous person is gone.
Yeah.
There's memories of them, but they're gone
Yeah.
forever.
Well, let's see. So,
It's a bunch of
but
death.
But like,
Yeah.
so Jadzia knows what Curzon looks like naked, right?
Yeah.
But Curzon never gets to know what she looks like naked. But there's like
Well,
stuff
I
like,
guess he does.
and the way
But he looked at her file.
Yeah, he
He
checked
looked at her
it.
file.
Oh yeah, through that though.
And you know,
Yeah, I
there's
guess
there's trill people who live in the caves and have that like milky white soup that the trill worms float around in. There's that
Cisco
one
wanted to
episode.
make some milky white soup for Jadzia.
Yeah.
Fucking weird. He was like catcalling his best friend.
Yeah,
He's like,
yeah.
old man, oh, you're hot. Oh my god. Which is weird because it completely objectified the character of Jadzia, right? And it to a lesser extent the Dax itself, but like Dax was, given some more sort of recognition, but he was still, and it makes sense because that's the person he knew was Curzon, right? So I guess it makes sense. But like Curzon was really the only entity of the trill or whatever, and the host that he really recognized as a person. Jadzia was just some suit that Curzon was wearing, which is ironic because they were both suits for the trill to begin with.
Yeah.
Doesn't that happen with the new Dax too, though? Doesn't he still call her old man? Like,
Yeah, because
it
he
seems a little
knows her.
weirder.
so it's sort of, but it's like, but there, he's
You
had
mean
this
the
whole.
second Dex.
Yeah, because he's had this whole experience with Jadzia, so he's had experience with two of them before. So,
Oh yeah, but that completes. Even though there was behind the scenes reasons why that went down, that does complete. Curzon was his mentor, Jadzia was his colleague, and then he becomes the mentor towards Esri. So with that same creature, he has
It's interesting.
sort of a long arc with. But an interesting fact about Terry Farrell is she was cast when filming had already started, I believe. I think they were 5 or more days into filming. They kept seeing people they just didn't know who to get for the character, and all these things weren't working out. They picked Terry Farrell, and unique among most of the cast, all the other cast, which was unusual for a Star Trek show, all the other cast were hugely accomplished actors,
Yeah.
particularly in the theater. All of them, each and every one of them.
Avery Brooks,
well,
yeah.
especially Avery Brooks and Odo and Quark. They were both top. Rene Auberjonois was super famous.
Quark was on a Seinfeld.
yeah, he was the caddy.
Yeah.
He was-
Yeah, and he was in a lot of stuff too. But on the
Put
on the
bra on.
stage, all of
Stanley
them were really prominent on the stage. And Terry Farrell, though, she did not have a lot of experience, so she was hyper nervous about the whole thing because she was cast late.
She was on that Ted Danson show.
Yeah, she did. She
Becker?
Becker. Yeah.
Yeah.
She left Deep Space Nine for Becker. Effectively.
But in a way that kind of works though, that because doesn't the character say at the last second they picked me to be the host, and I wasn't really prepared to be the host, and it's sort of like that with the character too on the show.
It's like some Kubrick shit, man.
Not
That's some
bad,
Kubrick
dude.
shit.
Aha! I came up with
That's
some
like
shit right
Kubrick.
there.
That's like when
Yeah.
Kubrick used to yell at Shelley Duvall to make her cry and call her a bad actress and stuff, just because he wanted her to be like more stressed out.
Yeah,
in The
exactly.
Shining.
Yeah, maybe that's what. Life.
Well, you have to. For any Deep Space Nine fans or any Star Trek fans, definitely check out the documentary "What We Left
I
Behind."
can't wait to see that.
It's
yeah.
so good, and they go into that a little bit with Terry Farrell, and there's a lot of bad stuff happened behind the scenes that was not cool, and it was unfortunate to hear, but it's the truth, and so it's like interesting to learn about
Well,
that.
Berman, that guy was kind of a.
Apparently, he was like unpleasant in certain
Yeah.
ways,
Yeah.
but definitely check that out.
Yeah, no, that's so. Is it like it's just a well-made documentary? Can you enjoy it even if you don't know Deep Space Nine?
Oh yeah,
or-
yeah. You can
'cause-
enjoy it just if you enjoy the making of television.
See,
but-
because I like that. To me, that's what makes a good documentary. If you don't have to even know the subject matter,
Yeah.
you're still intrigued.
well,
by it,
they did a very good job in the documentary, coming at things from different angles, and they used unique. It's not a straight up documentary. They used unique ways of presenting information beyond just interviews. And running out throughout the whole thing is they did this thing where they got a lot of the previous writers together in a room, and they mapped out the first episode of an 8th season if they were to make a new season right now. And they blocked out all the 5 acts of this new quote unquote episode.
Oh, that's
It was really
kinda
cool
neat.
'cause
Yeah,
it all
that's
takes
really
place,
neat.
Yeah, it takes place like 20
I
years.
was
in the
reading
future
about
and
that
shit.
on Wikipedia.
It's
I gotta
fantastic.
now. I really want to watch.
Oh
it.
yeah, and you see pieces of it, and it feels it's the voice of Deep Space Nine because they have Ron Moore is there. I mean, they have a ton of like the top
All the top writers
from the show. It's really cool.
Yeah, I was surprised Ron Moore had nothing to do with this pilot, or did he? Or Because he did.
I don't know if he had come over to
Because
Deep
I don't.
Space Nine.
Because this was very well thought out, and he just did such a great job with it. And he did with the reimagining of BSG.
Yeah, but he was also working on the TNG
TNG,
movie,
yeah.
Generations, and he might have still been at TNG before. I can't remember. We'd have to look that up.
Gotcha. So okay. So I wanted to bring up the goodbye to O'Brien from Picard. I thought that was a very touching moment.
That was supposed to be.
We were
that-
talking about that a little bit.
That was like
Oh, you fuckers.
that was that was like the fucking scene with Data and what's his name? DeForest Bones. Yeah,
DeForest
DeForest Kelly.
Kelly.
Like and from TNG because that ended the episode, right? Didn't it?
Yeah.
Like,
It was like halfway
Yeah,
point.
I think
I
so.
didn't. Okay, that makes sense.
I think it did. I assumed it did. It seemed.
Yeah,
I just thought it would be
that
funny if, when I was watching it, I thought it'd be funny if, like, because Picard goes and he does the transport. It'd be funny if he fucked up the transport and like O'Brien died right there
That'd be pretty awesome.
because like
Paul Meany would be annoyed.
that'd be funny if they just wrote him off.
It made
in
it
that
really
way.
gory. Like half of his body got all fucked up, and then
Yeah.
So you get to the station.
Exactly.
You meet all the
I
characters.
wasn't thinking all that, but that
all
would
the
be
characters
hilarious.
are dickheads in
Yeah.
various ways, and not dickheads is too strong maybe, but they're clearly more interesting in terms of the conflict they have in between each other and all that. But so a lot of the first part of the episode is just laying down the character work, but then comes like Ducat, and Ducat comes in and is immediately like all Ducati.
That
and Sort of the
motherfucker.
beginning of this, what some would argue is like one of the better evil character villains.
yeah.
Evil's not fair, but evil like antagonists in all of Star Trek. And right at the beginning, Ducat is just walking right into the office
Like he owns it.
and making it very clear, I like this place. I'm kind of pissed off that you're sitting there.
And you know that he would take it back in a second if he could. Yeah.
And
No.
then he tries
He probably
to do
likes
He
all the,
does
weird,
it.
all the weird shit about that space station, how it looks all strange, and everything makes funny noises and stuff. It's all like a completely different sound effects and different look than anything that Starfleet would do. Like,
Yeah, that's true
and
too.
the transporters are all weird and like.
Well, he's been running the place. He's a
Everything's like
sadist too. You
different
find
body.
out. Well, it's pretty obvious, I guess, early on
I think
that
all
he's a
those
sadist.
Cardassians are sadists.
Well, he's especially because not all of them. I mean,
Oh, Brian has always thought
they're not like
you ever
us.
heard of Setlick 3?
Yeah, I know. They don't appreciate human life the way we do. Doesn't he say that at one point? And
Something. It's like they're not humans. Come on.
he does.
I mean-
well, on a TNG episode, he talks about that.
But yeah,
Anyway.
the conversation from the start was definitely like the sort of aggressive doublespeak, because he was basically saying things like, "Oh, if the Enterprise, if Deep Space Nine is ever in trouble, we're right around the corner to
You're very lonely out
Yeah,
here.
right.
You're very
You know,
far from the Starfleet.
basically saying we're gonna fuck you up if you don't,
Yeah.
I'm like,
We gonna fuck you in your ass.
Cardassian neighbors.
yeah,
Well, I like the whole thing where he's explaining to Cisco, how did you enjoy your visit with Kaiopaka? What about that orb? And Cisco says, "Oh,
Yeah, he tips his hand on the
What
little
orb are
bit.
you talking about?" And
Yeah.
what's neat about that is that Ducat knows that Cisco is lying, and Cisco knows that Ducat knows that Cisco
Right.
is lying, but they have to play this little game.
Yeah.
And as we move through the episode, we see repeated versions of this same idea of, sort of deception and manipulation, even where the deception is known to be a deception, but it's so it's all strategic. It's true 3D, 4D chess kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
In TNG and TOS, the majority, you didn't see that as often. There was sometimes a little ruse here or there, but usually it was more linear in fashion in terms of like this happens, then this happens, then this happens. Whereas I find that the storyline, certainly in this episode, is immediately more convoluted and interesting.
well,
it's layered.
and it begins and to a lesser extent because it's not so much about deception, but it is about not meaning something else from what you say. When his first conversation with Picard, and you can tell he's like, yeah, I was on that ship, you fucked up, and all that stuff, and like,
you piece of
and
shit.
Picard, like, yeah, you
was very tense,
and it was
yeah.
like, and it's like so jarring, but in a good way because it worked. It was like the only time that you get to see someone make Picard look like a total asshole piece of shit, but like. You can buy it on one hand, but you understand that he's not really an asshole. Like, you understand that the circumstances were fucked up, but it's like he kind of puts Picard in his place a little bit, but not really, because Picard's just super professional. But like that face Picard makes when he says that, he's just got this look of like sort of like he's
taken aback. He's thrown off because he's expecting just to.
he's like mortified.
He like
almost or
turns
something,
away.
yeah.
He like turns around.
Well, both great actors. I mean, both
Yeah.
master actors.
That's the thing. Almost all the actors, including the side character actors. So many of them are just so brilliant.
Yeah.
And that's not to knock on any of the TNG or whatever actors, but it's just there's a specific caliber, very theatrical caliber.
Well, I just meant for that scene with Avery Brooks and Patrick
No,
Stewart.
I agree.
I mean,
saying
there's
there two of many.
No, there were a
massive
lot.
Cast, whereas in the other shows, and including later shows, you didn't necessarily see that as much, where they were hiring. Literally, this is a fantastic, amazing, insanely good actor to do this role for one episode or something. But they did that a lot on Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
They're like the guy in Duet. I mean, it's like it's an Emmy-winning performance when it comes down the line, of course, later in the season.
Isn't Duet the season 1, right?
Season 1,
and that's
with,
like one of the best.
It's one of the best episodes of TV, if you ask me.
Yeah, I mean, I forgot that. I need to watch that.
But the actor who plays the Cardassian prisoner in that, the what he has to do is amazing, and that's a characteristic of the Cardassians that you get really more here in Deep Space Nine. They were more slimy on TNG.
Yeah.
I think they became more Shakespearean on Deep Space Nine, and their grandiosity, and that seems to be a character trait that they all share.
But Gul Jasad, like near the end, was like extremely. He was like so excessive, but I seemed a little much, but like at the same time, I kind of dug it. Just like,
but he was another. It's a great example of you're seeing not only the Federation strategy or the protagonist strategy. You're seeing the antagonist strategy too, and the secondary antagonist strategy, which is that guy, and it makes sense. He understands. He knows that there's got to be a ruse. He says, "Of course they didn't install all these weapons. That doesn't make. It's got to be a ruse."
Right, and that was a deception within a deception, because it's like, we got past. They were hiding all this shit.
What
they
did
have.
he say? Like some kind of shadows. They've created all these something.
Duridium
shadows. Yeah.
But so what makes Gul Dukat?
So
I think if you wake up one day and you're seeing Duridium shadows, I think you need to visit an oncologist.
Oh, dude, yeah.
Go straight
what
to the
made him
oncologist.
hesitate?
Oh, yeah.
Because if he knew it was bullshit.
Well, I think it was, once his first officer guy was giving him shit about it, I think he was just put in kind of a place where it was like, well, I don't think they've got it, but now I'm fucking an asshole.
But if they do, right?
Yeah, so it was, and I guess the ruse was, it's like, they were covering up their defenses, but we got past what their cover up. We got past and so we're able to actually
Double
see what they
defense.
have.
Let's zap the shit out of them.
We're actually able to see what they have, and they have all this shit. And he's like, no, check again.
He's like, I'm a slimy
He said-
bastard that I would do exactly that.
Yeah, but he's not sure. Well, maybe he thinks maybe we did. We don't trust Starfleet, so maybe in a way, maybe there is a slight chance, because I don't trust those guys, that it could be there.
The problem is,
maybe another layer of it.
I mean, somehow they've created a massive illusion of Duridium shadows. So
A massive illusion.
a massive illusion.
Duranium.
In Deep Space Nine,
Could be
you
duranium.
you come to learn about the Cardassians, and you have more understanding of them as opposed to the Next Generation, where they're just like these bad guys that are these guys are fucked up. Like,
Yeah, and Garrick is
it's like, these guys are fucked up and weird, but you have more an understanding of that's their deal. These are the aliens that do this fucked up.
Well, Deep Space Nine is where you find a lot of nuance in the Klingons and the Ferengi,
Yeah,
all of them.
Cardassians, among others, the Bajorans, how there are different people.
The Ferengi are super fleshed out, and you get like the Grand Nagus. It's like Wallace Shawn.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
pretty
Well,
awesome.
I mean, it seems like the theme of the show is like a lot of lines like, well, this isn't Starfleet, I'm not Starfleet, I'm Bajoran. And then later there's the episode where Sisko's like, I'm not, when he's fighting Q in the fist fight, he's like, I'm not Picard. Like, it's all about like, we're not those characters. We're not that. We're like this own other world altogether. So
I know that. Garrick is a good example of
uniforms are different.
He's just weird, but he's not weird because he's a Cardassian. He's just weird.
Yeah. Well, they talk about it on the documentary that Garrick was sort of played as gay.
Oh,
and
he's into Bashir.
And for the first 3 seasons, that's how the actor portrayed him.
He's a tailor.
Andrew Robinson. He said that. He said, I just played him as a gay. He's a tailor. I mean, not to be stereotypical, but that was his sort of, and his interest in Bashir was partly an attraction.
Of course, yeah.
What he knew would be an unrequited attraction, but it was still, why not? I'm enjoying.
Yeah, he's into him.
Dude.
Yeah, why not?
And that he said a lot of his acting choices. And it makes sense if you see it, are fed into that. How he would be on the one hand very forgiving of Bashir, on the other hand would get very frustrated with him, like you might if there was somebody you're into and you knew it was a relationship that would never work out. But what I can't remember the exact wording, but the impression I got was that the producers sort of started to figure that out and went to them and were like, not the producers of the show, like the lower, but the studio people came down and said, look, bros, you gotta cut it out with that Garrick fella. He's and then they forced in that whole Zial situation.
This is still the early 90s.
Andrew Robertson said, Robinson said it worked out in the end and it was good, but he said that he felt that was,
where he had a daughter or what? Were you talking about?
Where Gul Dukat's daughter Zial and Garrick are kind of starting to hang out. And
okay,
it's sort of like a semi-romantic thing.
Yeah.
And that they were not a fan of that. That was a little bit forced on them in a sense.
Well, I mean, it wasn't until I think in all of Star Trek, I guess on Discovery there's an openly gay character, but there was that whole show, The Outcast, where they were supposedly going to have a transgender or gay person, and they didn't go all the way with it.
Well, so in that one,
it's like a cop out.
Jonathan Frakes was pushing exceedingly hard because that was a Riker episode.
Yeah.
So he knew about it well ahead of time, and he was really pushing for them to cast a man as that particular androgynous as the character. Soren, I think is the name, who he falls in love with, and he thought that would increase the impact, but they just got flat out no's from the producers on that.
Because at that time, and it wasn't the same thing with Deep Space Nine. Was there still no, that's too much?
Well, Deep Space Nine let them do it with two women.
Right.
Which is
okay. That's
technically
right.
progress, but
But yeah, sci-fi geeks.
It's progress in a strange, regressive kind of way.
It is.
It's like, wow, I like that. Like the most.
It's
It's like everybody was already cool with that.
Guys can, like your average guy can still sexualize.
Well, yeah, the most
Exactly.
It's a sexualized thing. It's for the sexual gratification of straight males.
The producers are like,
It's not. Yeah.
We'll let this one through.
It's like the most homophobic guys be like, I like that scene.
Doesn't count. The ladies are beautiful.
Yeah. No. Well. But that mentality was still going on in 1996 or whatever.
They still had to play the role of. I'm sorry. There was the Kira. Even she was a strong character, but they still tried to play it up like, oh, she's a woman, but she's feisty. Like O'Brien's exactly. Have you ever met a Bajoran woman captain or whatever?
That was odd.
Yeah. And
they're all feisty chicks with attitude.
And then at the end, Quark puts his hand on her hip, and she's like, "If you ever do that again,
they
I'll
got funny noses.
Kick your nose."
And he likes it like that.
He's like, "I love a woman in uniform." Yeah. So there's still some of these kind of weird sort of. It's progressive, I guess, in one sense, but on the other hand, it's kind of like
it's also there's a difference there in the characterization. When Quark does it, it fits his characterization. Yeah,
I mean,
he's a sleazy borrower.
That's true.
But when O'Brien does it, it's kind of like, well, he's
an old school Irish dude.
Yeah, he acts like an old school Irish guy.
Like to the 19th century. He's even before our time.
It doesn't make any sense, that he would be that old school.
Anachronistic Irishman.
Right. That's how they treat Irishmen. They did it in that TNG episode too.
Yeah, right. That was weird.
Old Irish are always stuck in this one time period.
That's a good point. Yeah, that TNG episode was that the Up the Long Ladder, I think. Oh man, that's some weird.
That was
shit.
a goofy one. Yeah.
You got. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say you unrelated. Laterally related. See, their first Morn sighting was 34 minutes. 27. So Quark says. So I didn't remember why he was on the ship, but before, but watching it, it's really just because Nog got caught doing some shit, and that's why Quark's whole character and all that stuff is just because Nog was caught stealing some bullshit.
Although you could assume that maybe Cisco might have manipulated him or somebody else in to serve the same function, because Cisco showed a real cleverness to manipulate in a kind of a cruel way, honestly, Quark into staying in
he did
what's a dangerous situation.
It did. And it's interesting though when you're watching a show, especially when a show is just starting and you see characters trying to point out, is this an extra, or is this going to be like a legit character? Because the first time you actually see Quark, it's when the shit's all fucked up, and O'Brien's telling Sisko about like, oh yeah, the Cardassians were like 4 shop owners got killed because Cardassians wanted to have some fun, and they would just fuck the whole place up. And you see Quark like in the background, like picking up a bottle, like looking a little bit annoyed, like putting his shit down. And if they never came back to Quark later, like you could have easily written that off of as like not awkward or weird. You would have been like, oh, that's just an extra to showing that he's putting his bar back together. But then he pans out into a whole character, and he almost leaves the whole place, and like here he is. But yeah, so
quick side note on Quark, and I guess also Odo. It's hilarious how bad the makeup is in this first episode. Second episode completely corrected.
Oh, they messed it up.
It's Odo. They just hadn't gotten to the final thing, but Odo's makeup looks monstrous. He looks like a monster.
He does look scary.
It even looks like it's melting a little bit in
Quark,
parts.
Quark looks like he's just wearing the guest star Ferengi TNG. You know, not
that they throw on you and throw your makeup on.
Yeah, in the second episode, he has a proper
prosthetic,
sculpted to his face. He looks very different.
Wasn't Armin Shimmerman in the first TNG episode
Yeah,
with the Ferengi?
Yeah, he played a few things.
Yeah.
Not only a Ferengi, he played at least 1 or 2 Ferengi, but I think he also might have.
Was he in the first Ferengi?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, in the last Outpost.
I think he was in the last.
Yeah,
episode.
because I just watched that last night.
Was that the one where
dudes.
they took over the ship, the Enterprise? Like
no,
the
it's
Ferengis?
when
No, that was
it's
later.
when both ships are like kind of stuck together, and they're being taken off to this like weird planet with this guy, this wizard dude, who's like
that wizard.
it's
dude.
really
It's like
cheesy.
a remnant
yeah.
of an ancient civilization.
Yeah, like from hundreds of thousands of years ago, and he's like, who is this Sun
Some
Tzu
kind of
you were thinking
hologram.
of? Yeah, it's really corny. Yeah, it's but it's I've been watching first.
I think
season of
Armin
that.
Shimmerman also played. Didn't he play the face in the box in that? Where God, what's that episode called? Where Troy has to marry that dude, but then instead he like goes and helps the AIDS aliens.
Oh, is
AIDS
that him?
aliens.
I
You
guess
remember
that-
the AIDS aliens?
Yeah, it was.
I don't remember the AIDS aliens.
Is that
Was
season 1 or
was
2?
it Quark though? Was he the same character?
No. I think
it was just
no.
that
He
actor.
wasn't Quark in Last Outpost. And
Oh, okay, yeah.
yeah. But the actor has been in Star
And
Trek.
they've done that a lot
Yeah.
with James Cromwell and other people.
So was this now when in reference to like Sisko's trickery with Quark, was this like a winky wink, or was it supposed to be serious when he goes, there's a Ferengi there's a Ferengi legal tradition. It's called plea bargaining.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like, well,
Well, that's kind of a
that's just a thing. Like, I mean,
wasn't sure.
it's just a thing
Yeah,
people do. And we've had it too.
I'm
Like,
sure they still do that in the
They were-
24th
okay,
century.
yeah, were they
No,
trying to?
no.
Was it one of those things where they're trying to be like, oh, there's these primitive ways that
Yes,
that
but
would go on concurrently with us, like right
It backfires
Yeah,
because I
yeah.
do think the implication was that the justice system is so advanced that they don't even need to like go to that level.
right.
I
But
think
we know that's not true.
the more ominous proposition is the Federation knows who's guilty. They will declare you guilty. No need to
Hey,
plea
you know
bargain.
what? That's the reason that these right wingers like it so much. That's probably how they're,
Oh, man, that shit drives me nuts. I can't wait. We're definitly doing an episode on the
I
right
can't-
wingers.
I'm gonna have to think on that too, because it's just such a.
Go look up comments in like on Reddit and other places, and every now and then, honestly, it's not a huge thing, but every now and then if you go and you'll see like the downvoted comments, and if you usually it'll hide those, and then if you expand them, somebody will just be saying some awful shit, but from their perspective, it seems perfectly rational.
Right.
They're all like, I don't understand the problem. Of course, the Cardassians should have exterminated the Bajorans. Nothing against the Bajorans, but it's a strategic thing. The universe is a difficult and hard place to live. And it's like, wait a
sociopath.
second, what the fuck are you talking about?
You're missing the
I'm
whole
not saying
point.
the Cardassians were right. I'm just saying strategically, it made sense to rape their planet.
Yeah, Hitler. I mean, he had some good ideas. He may went a little far with it, but at the end of the day, I mean, he had a solid plan. I mean,
went a little far.
he went a little
the
further than I would
Volkswagen.
have, but. No. I mean, the whole
good
genocide was
roads.
fine. He just should have kept it to 1 million instead of 4 million. I just went too far with it.
You
is
never
all.
go full genocide.
Yeah, exactly.
Once they can start calling it genocide, you've gone too far.
Yeah, I mean, 1 million would have been, it'd be like, all right, he was a tough guy.
Although Cisco, we know, Cisco does some pretty fucked up shit in the future.
That's
but
true.
But they lay the foundation for that character, and one thing that makes his character interesting from a Starfleet officer perspective is that he is a good Starfleet officer. In fact, he's arguably better than Picard or Kirk in some ways because He's more about getting the job done.
gets
He's
stuff
more. He's
done.
more what you think of when you think of a commanding officer in an actual military dealing with tricky problems.
I mean, it's also tricky, like, because going back to the idea of, like, is this Starfleet rule or is this, Bajoran rule? Whose rule is this? I mean, even Quark points out, like, I can't operate my establishment under Starfleet rules. He's like, this isn't Starfleet. So it's never established what the rules are, but, like you're saying, he has to play this role of getting things done how he can, like, while trying to, like, impossibly please these both sides, and that's not possible, so he has to kind of jump around.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And he wants his mission is to get Bajor to join the Federation. That's why he's there. So initially that's what his target is.
And it turns into, like, the only way he can get Bajor to join the Federation is if he pleases the prophets in order to follow what Kai Opaka wants him to do in order to get her to unite the Bajorans, because it's like all she has to do is unite the Bajorans join up. She's the one who has all this fucking power. All she has to do is say go for it. But
Hence
she's
why,
Well,
as
that's why they
Daniel
wrote her out,
mentioned,
yeah.
they had to
Because it would have been made. Because if she was really going to unify everybody, there's
Right.
no conflict. Right?
I like that
right.
alternate reality Cisco where
Yeah.
in the alternate reality
that dude's
where
tripping.
he's all like
oh yeah,
He's all
pirate and
mercenary.
shit.
Yeah,
Does
he's
he
cool.
does he fuck Kira in that
Yeah,
universe?
I think he
he
fucks
does.
everybody.
He looks like he's
He
getting
has sex
around
with
in that
Dax.
one. Yeah.
He that mirror universe Cisco gets around. And by the way, when you see beach scene, like beach flashback Cisco, he's got some moves. That guy,
Oh, yeah.
that guy knows how to
Yeah.
pick up a lady.
Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't like forced. It was like, yeah, he's
those lemonades and that sand that's all hot and
Okay,
shit.
another
smart.
here. I just have to play this weird Cisco moment, and it's
Uh-oh.
probably pretty obvious which one I'm going to play.
I was carrying 3 lemonades. The sand was burning my feet. And I stopped here to... Ow!
Yeah, right.
Do you realize how incredible this is?
and he managed to recover from that. You know?
That was
I know.
the most.
It's so weird.
That was the most intense Cisco outburst of the fucking episode. When he goes,
Yeah.
"Ow!" and then afterwards he follows. I can't even get that high pitch. Afterwards he follows it up with this like little snuggly giggle, like hee hee hoo.
What I loved
Pillsbury
about that.
Doughboy. It was insane.
What I loved about that from and a lot of his other characterizations throughout this episode, and I speak from I am culturally identified as white. Quite white, I think, is on the spectrum.
Quite white.
I'm somewhere on the quite white.
This is going to end up in me
thing.
being ignorant, isn't it?
No, I thought what I loved about that, and I remember.
I like it,
I
too.
remember even
I
as
like
a
it,
kid.
too. It's-
No, but the specific reason I liked it, and I could be fantasizing, but I have a recollection of thinking this when I was a kid, was that Avery Brooks refused to subdue his blackness. You know, he was willing to do things that we associate with black culture and not tone himself down
Yeah.
to conform to some blah 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 blah.
He was just being himself. Yeah.
And he was being himself, and it to me there might even be something there in that you don't see him act like that as much when he's in the uniform, when he's in command. He almost has to play this other role. But there you're seeing him in his real self. Same thing when he's with Jake. He's so much more expressive and physical. Yeah, exactly. He's very and you see him grow into that more
he's
in the
a
uniform
master
later
actor.
on.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, but I mean, and those are choices that I don't, as brilliant as the writing in, I think that's purely from the acting. He chose to act very differently when he was being himself versus when he was being the Starfleet commander.
That's an interesting point. I guess the only time he really went a little out there and crazy, of course, was the more emotional parts when he was like, "We can't just leave her.
Yes.
it's real." You know, like
Yeah.
all those things. So I guess
I thought she was gorgeous. Like the
yeah.
actress, I was just like, man, because she's probably younger than we are now.
Oh God, I was thinking about that exact thing. I was
Oh,
like, she's younger. Like when I was a
everybody's
kid,
younger
like
than
she
she's
was
so hot.
When I was
yeah.
a kid, like she's an adult, and like
Oh, she's like
She's
a
an old lady.
34-year-old
Yeah, right.
woman who was just a beautiful 34-year-old actress.
maybe younger. I don't know. How
I don't
old is
know.
she?
Maybe she could have been in her 20s.
I that she was in her 20s, but I really
Well, let me look it up.
We all
Yeah,
know
I'm
that
trying to
not
think
very
of it.
good at
I'm
telling
trying to
you.
think I'm not like totally creepy.
But we another aspect of
Too late.
Cisco.
She was exactly my age.
Oh well.
Another aspect of Cisco that's
Everybody's
present.
creepy.
It's throughout the entire series, but it's really pushed here that we don't see anywhere. Well, not much elsewhere in Star Trek is that whole emotion, family, expression, stress. the main other example I have of it is the episode Family in the right after Picard comes back from being Locutus of Borg, and it's an interesting connection because obviously that's Picard's reaction to that. They're both having this reaction to basically to Wolf 359.
Wolf 359.
And Picard breaks down crying with his brother and the wrestling and things. We just don't get to see that a lot from Picard or anybody really. Even when Kirk's son dies, we don't get to see quite as much. There's
Well, we do
emotion.
see him break down in Generations, like when
And Kirk is a pretty flashy dude for all the other.
And Generations, it's all of a piece. It's Wolf 359. It's Family. It's Generations. It's this episode where there's so much kind of emotion comes out of this one event. Basically, it filters out in these multiple different directions.
Well, I thought that was because there was the spirituality aspect, which I thought was really good. That you could interpret it either way, either as hard sci-fi or as maybe there is something mystical happening. But it was more than that. But more than that, it was just a deeply human kind of.
I like my sci-fi soft.
Do you like it hard or soft? Soft.
No, it is. You're right. It's deeply human. And the other thing about and this episode is that it lays the stage for a series that is, on the one hand, it's this literally galaxy-spanning political setup. This plot. It's a Game of Thrones like plot with Bajor and the Federation and the Cardassians, and then you have the people over on the other side of the wormhole in the Gamma Quadrant, and then eventually the Romulans and the Klingons get involved. But ultimately, right from the beginning, the story is all about Sisko. It's all about the main character, and the main character is not a vehicle for stories. It's the stories are about the main character. Ultimately, it's literally all about him.
Well, he's the emissary.
He's the emissary, exactly. Yeah. And you don't see that with Picard. You don't see that with Kirk, and you don't really see that in the same way later. A little bit in Discovery,
and they have supporting characters that are really interesting and fleshed out and beloved, but they're beloved, but not. Okay, I looked it up. The actress is Felicia M. Bell. She was born in Felicia Bell. She was born in 1960, so she was around 33.
Oh wow, you were spot on.
Oh yeah, I could tell.
You.
So
the Cage is kind of about he's like the main dude. That episode's kind of about him.
It is. The episode's about him. I think that's a fair point, but I think it's less.
Yeah,
but the story, the
yeah.
thrust is not about him.
Right.
You're talking about the Cage,
but the Cage.
About Pike.
That's a good.
Well,
point.
it is. He's the main dude. At the end of the menagerie, what do they have him go back to the Cage where he can be handsome again? Is that
okay?
The Cage. But like I was saying with the whole Telosians things, it's sort of like I said, the story they set up this whole it's about Captain Pike, and they have this whole setup for this whole race of people that you could make a whole series about, and it's kind of what they did with I'm sure they weren't thinking of the Cage when they did it, but that's what I kept thinking of when I saw the Bajorans. I kept thinking, the Telosians are this race of people that had totally different issues put upon them, but they were both had this fucked up background, and with the Cage it evoked this whole sort of story, this whole this sort of ordeal that they had to go through that they don't really have time to explore in the episode, but a DS9,
they got
the Cage was very the very first thing they're throwing out there.
Right. Well, the Cage. It wasn't about. It wasn't meant to.
The first.
It wasn't meant to be about the Telosians in the Cage. That was just sort of like a side thing. But I think the result of what they had from creating the Telosians was interesting. Just sort of this implied story.
But
I
think it's a nuanced difference. But in the Cage, it was. Like many stories, you have a main character and he goes through a trial and he learns something about himself at the end, and then the story's over and he is a changed person at the end of the story. That's a good story. And in fact, that's one of the problems with a lot of other stories, even really good ones, where it all resets at the end because it's kind of not a real story in the end, because there's not any progression of the hero, because maybe a little bit. Deep Space Nine, I think, was a little bit better, but the nuance difference is that it's not in Emissary. it reveals that the whole tale revolves around Cisco, and it's not about Cisco growing necessarily. It's just that he is a component of the entire tale that's about to unfold. And that's not the impression I got in The Cage. I got that was just a story.
No, there was definitely not much in the way of development on that.
We
No,
learned
you're
about
right.
Pike that he doesn't want to be with a gimp as a normal guy, but he wants to be with a gimp as a gimp.
Yeah.
And I can respect that.
No, I mean that's not
how it works.
That's not an unkind comparison. As somebody, I wish I remember. I've heard a couple people, I guess, say this that people ask, "Is Star Trek progressive?" And yes, but it's progressive for the time in which it was produced.
Right.
Right. So there are going to be aspects of old series that do still look progressive,
Right.
but really they're progressive from the perspective
Right, so yeah,
of
you
the
just
time.
take that
years
into
ago,
account,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, and that's the only fair way really to look
Picard
at it.
actually progressed throughout that DS9 episode. He began by saying Bajor.
Yeah.
By the end,
Yeah.
he said Bajor.
Yeah,
So
somebody correct. You know what it was? Is he had some attaché come up to him and was like, "Dude, you're like attaché. We went over this, Captain Picard. You're making us look like fucking assholes."
What am I, an asshole?
Oh, speaking of attaché, O'Brien pronounced it attaché in the episode.
Attaché.
Well, he's Irish.
Yeah, that's guy.
He's got a funny pronunciation.
Miles O'Brien. I just fixed that.
He was a total. Speaking of dicks, too, he was a total dick to the DS9 computer. Like he was like after he tried to here's this technobabble part. The reason that they could move the part where they had to move DS9 close to the wormhole, and he was like he couldn't.
He kicked it.
Who's the voice of the computer? It sounds like Kira.
Was that Majel Barrett?
No,
it wasn't Major Barrett.
that was for Deep Space Nine. I don't think it was.
Oh,
So-
it was on the ship that Cisco was on at the beginning.
Yeah, it's on the Federation
It's
ship.
the
Okay,
Starfleet.
that's
She's the
where I
voice
got
of
it mixed
So
up. Yeah.
Jadzia Dax says when he's like, you can't do it, she goes, couldn't you modify the subspace field output of the deflector generators just enough to create a low-level field around the station?
I might be able to do that.
He was like, so we could lower the inertial mass. And she's like, if you can make it lighter. They were all about doing this in this episode, too, is using some technobabble and then summing it up afterwards. Because there was a part, O'Brien was like, I'm going to floop-de-flimdy flame. And he's like, I'm going to hit them with the blast and it's going to hurt.
Well,
he would
and
sum it up afterwards.
They
I appreciate that.
apparently made I remember reading once a while back that they made a concerted effort on Deep Space Nine, not always successfully, but to get away from the technobabble.
Right. So they had to have a little, but they had to transition.
It still happens from time to time.
So they tried to do that stuff, and the computer was all giving them flack, being like, I'm not going to do that. Systems, excuse me, I don't want to
Excuse me.
I don't want to do that to you.
A little-
And so afterwards, O'Brien was a dick. He was like, computer, we're going to have a talk later. He kept being all short with the computer and all impatient.
A little technobabble is okay, though.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
Oh, yeah, no, I wasn't a complaint.
because
It was just
it'll
interesting.
add to the flavor of we're watching some nerdy ass shit.
Yeah, it's
It is
amusing.
Star-
Oh,
it
it's
is
totally
Star
amusing.
Trek.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would definitely don't want to be. Don't get me wrong.
you just don't want it to solve the story problems.
No,
and
no.
But it is fun from time to
Well,
time.
and I think most of Star Trek was okay at this. Occasionally they leaned on it too much. Deep Space Nine was pretty good. This episode being an example of employing the technobabble, but not having it be the ultimate solution. So,
Yeah, you
in
gotta
other
have a
words,
little-
they do this whole thing to reduce the inertia of the station and sort of get it moving. And you're thinking
subspace.
that's the solution to the problem. But then it turns out no. Now there's Cardassians.
Yeah.
There's all this other shit they have to deal with.
Yeah.
And it's not the solution to the problem. So the technobabble
Right.
does not by itself resolve the problem. Other things have to be involved in terms of the actual plot. Moving forward in an organic way to solve the problem.
What was the point of Kira and them so Jasad he seemed like he was just there to prove that Kira's kind of a badass, but her plan, it was cool that he saw through it, but what did it really do? It bought them literally minutes. And that's all it took, actually. By the time she was going to give up, then they were like, "Hey, look, the neutrino thing's happening."
Are you talking about-
What happened was this is I think one of the first examples of what happened frequently in Deep Space Nine, which is one of the heroes presents a plan. They have challenges implementing the plan. They implement the plan. Plan doesn't work.
Yeah.
Because she was hoping that the bluff would work. And then at first they thought it worked because he called in reinforcements, and then he just started firing on them.
Yeah.
So he did the
Shadows.
dual decision. He said, "Okay, I'm going to call reinforcements,
But we're still gonna
I'm
attack
still
them."
going to fuck him up."
So what was?
Yeah.
But yeah. So what's the what was the point of it?
Her point was she was hoping he would wait.
Well, I mean, narratively, I guess the point was to show that she's willing to like do whatever it takes. It's just showing that she's like a freedom fighter, kind of like up against a corner, scratch your eyes out kind of person.
I think strategically it was just to buy time. They were just trying to buy as much time as possible.
Yeah.
If the ruse had worked, they would have had maybe a little bit more.
But
until the
strangely-
And it
reinforcements
did
came.
kind of work. I mean, they had literally in the nick of time.
Right.
They show up through the wormhole. Right.
She's like, okay, I'm about to tell him, hey, and then like,
Yeah,
like,
it was-
hey, they came. So like, it did buy him time, but like, that's
Exactly.
almost like incidental because it's kind of like.
Well, that's how life is. Life is incidental, Dan.
Life is incidental.
Life is incidental.
Dancing in the
I
rain
can't
and
offer
in
you the answers you
snow.
deny yourself. What was that?
Yeah, I can't offer. That was her being a fucking asshole to him, saying like, I could give this to you, but it's like saying like, I don't know, you can't. It's like throwing an artificial rule on somebody. You know?
Well,
Yeah, we cannot give you what you deny yourself. Look
It's like
for
saying-
solutions from within.
It's like saying like I want dessert, and like, well, you can't have dessert unless you eat your dinner first. So really, it's your fault you don't get dessert.
Hey,
It's like, wait, no, I'm not the one who made these rules. You're the one who told me that I have to eat dinner to get dessert.
Yep.
It's not me preventing myself getting from dessert. It's you putting me in this role that I didn't agree to.
You're
Yeah.
describing late stage capitalism.
yeah, it's some fucked up bullshit.
And by the way, Dan, you have to remember that the game wouldn't be worth playing if we knew what would happen.
I like that one. I like that one.
Cisco. That fucking
It is the
scene-
unknown that defines our existence.
I loved those scenes. They were kind of hokey, but I loved.
No, I actually thought they were very. I mean, from a philosophical perspective, that's great stuff.
It is.
I mean, that's
'cause
not
everything's
weak sauce.
non-linear and
the whole like, why do you exist here? Why do you exist here?
You're
That
supposed
shit
to be a
is
linear.
awesome.
You're supposed to have a linear existence.
They
Why
were
do you
Yeah, that was
keep
no,
doing
that was I really liked that part. Yeah, where he was
What is
saying
this?
like, yeah, well, you live here. Why do you live here? That's not
Where
linear. And that
else-
was like a callback to what he said earlier about how they're supposed to be linear. And it's like, you're right, we do live linear. So why am I forcing myself to live somewhere?
And where
Yeah, that was pretty awesome.
Where else have you seen trauma represented in that kind of way? It's such a creative way to represent trauma.
The whole idea of it's like, yeah, just the whole idea of him like,
we can't just leave her.
He's like, I don't know how to live without her, so I'm living back then still.
So I'm living in the worst point in her, her life.
It was
the end of
interesting.
her life.
It was interesting how he was trying to explain linear time to them, and initially they were right when he said, "No, why do you live here?" And he's like, "I don't live here. This is in the past." And then, like later on, you realize, "Oh yeah, he's totally stuck here." Yeah.
And well, go ahead, Dan.
Oh, I was gonna say it must be pretty fucking boring being like an omnipotent being. Like,
Yeah, so-
I mean, like, and the concept.
Well, if they don't feel time, they wouldn't be bored by
Yeah.
the passage of time.
So I guess the idea of learning must seem really dumb to them. Like, it's like
Because they know everything.
Yeah, because like that's what humans are about. So they're like, well, we're learning. That's what we're all about. We're about learning. They're like, that's fucking stupid.
We
Like,
already
that's
know.
like we already know it. This is waste of fucking time.
I would
The process is
I would
stupid.
argue a minor correction to what you said, Daniel, because you said they know everything. They don't know everything. They seem to know everything in their
In their
existence
context,
time
yeah.
frame, but they don't seem to. They're not like Q necessarily. They don't know everything about everything.
Well, that's
in
right.
all
They
of
didn't. Well, they
universe
didn't
or
understand what Cisco was. Like, what is this?
What is
time?
pleasure?
What is this penis here? what is this penis you speak
What is
of?
this touching? What is love?
Right.
Baby,
Yeah. Well, no. They don't know everything.
Pleasure,
Obviously,
time. What is lost?
they're in their own echo chamber. They're in their
At
own
one-
Fox News. They watch Fox News all the time.
At one time, she asked what
They're in the wormhole.
She was like, wormhole?
Yeah.
What is this? And then later she was like, pleasure? What is this? Like, that was her whole
Yeah.
fucking role there.
What is this pleasure?
No,
you
that's
speak
true.
of?
And that's interesting because, like, I guess they're not omnipotent, but they don't know. They, like, live through, like, all times. It's
Omniscient.
all-time omniscience. Omniscient and
neither.
omnipotence. They're neither.
Omnipotent is all powerful. Omniscient is all
omniscient. So they're neither. But they live at all times, whereas Q is supposedly omnipotent and omniscient, but he still follows like a linear timeline. The continuum implies like a
Q is more
It's
of a
continuing.
Q is
Yeah.
of course
That's
has
a linear.
there's the God problem because if Q did have powers, either Q is lying or he does have like the God powers. If he has the God powers, then most of his behavior doesn't make any sense. So he comes off as more of a literary
He's
device.
like a Greek god. Yeah.
The wormhole aliens are definitely a form of literary device in a sense, but they sort of the implied limitations they give them, especially by having them keep saying, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about to Cisco, and having him have to explain simple concepts. I think that did a really good job of underpowering them so that you didn't have the problem you had with Q, and that they ended up having with Kai Opaka, in a sense, in that this character, like the only reasonable way for this character to go would resolve all the problems. So how can we, this doesn't make any sense.
It's interesting. How did humans end up sort of like defending their existence to Q, though? Because then to humans it's like they can't pull the I'm learning thing. I guess compassion, was that like the whole thing? Was that was Q? I can't remember how
it was
that
the
was.
paradox.
It
was Picard understand, and as great as all the good things
it was
is,
a paradox, but like that's not the underlying.
Honestly, it's a bit of a cop out.
Well, in a way, wasn't it the whole idea of that they'd open their mind for that brief second to different to the Kelvin timeline and all the other different things that can happen.
I love All Good Things. All Good Things is amazing. It is exceedingly well written front to back, but it is a bit of a weak resolution
the whole thing
to the
where
Q thing. And I only say that because I personally, and I've never heard anybody suggest an alternate that would be better. I thought it was very good. I thought it was amazing. I thought it was brilliant. But honestly, Picard,
you're saying the whole
Picard can think about 3 different time periods at one time, and it's,
for that moment.
That means
you
humans
were
are gonna
open.
be-
It's like it had somebody has thought of that.
well, part of the problem I had with that is that, and now we're talking about the last episode of TNG, but the issue there was that the Wesley and the Traveler kind of already did that, like long ago. Like, can they transcend to some other thing?
Thought
we saw.
becomes reality, right?
Wesley did that already. So now you're saying like, oh, one day humans can like think better.
What did they? And I know I don't want to go in the weeds with TNG and the Traveler, but like, did they ever explain? Like, did Wesley, was he gone permanently?
No, he came. He came
back briefly and was a bratty piece of shit.
He was also in
Nemesis
with the Indian people, the American Indians.
Yeah, I was thinking that.
And he was in Nemesis.
Okay, I was thinking the series. He came back and was a dick to Geordi
with the American Indians. But also, I think
after he went off with the Traveler, I mean,
my personal fan canon is that the Traveler turned out to be a horrific child molester, and like when Wesley like aged out of his like,
he's like, yeah, just go home.
He totally left him abandoned somewhere, but then Wesley had some worked on his powers and was able to get back in time. For
I watched this. I watched this deleted scene with, but he is in the actual movie. Wesley is in Nemesis, but there's this deleted scene where he's like awkwardly talking about chicks and stuff, and it's like, you're not going to mention the whole Traveler thing, but at the end they cut that out, so it's not canon anyway, and we won't get into that movie. That's a whole canon.
We won't get into that.
Yeah.
Wesley.
Aggressive. Adversarial.
You remember that part with that baseball player?
Oh yeah.
Must have been fucking weird to be that actor, to have to come in that day and like play this part, and like people probably asked him, what'd you try out for? He's like, I have no fucking idea. Okay, just like,
that's a good point.
I just said this line
That's
in a
actually
baseball
really.
thing.
That's actually a really.
I have no idea
brilliant
what the
point.
fuck I just fucking did.
Yeah, I was like dressed up like Shoeless Joe Jackson.
Yeah.
I was saying like some weird ass shit.
And then he sees it like later on, maybe, and he's like, what the fuck? Like, that's what we were doing?
Well, think about your Jake Sisko. You're Sirach Lofton. You've been hired to play this kid. You're a young guy. You're working with Avery Brooks, who's this mega intense, super weird by all accounts guy.
Weird.
They ended up having this amazing relation, like a true father-son relationship. But anyway,
That's cool.
You are filming. Maybe it's the first day of filming. You're sitting on a dock pretending to fish. You and this guy who's playing your dad, and now you're doing multiple scenes.
Yeah.
And then one scene is like, oh, we're going to the space station, and the next scene you're talking like an alien, and your father's like, it is linear.
Right.
I was just trying to imagine being that 12-year-old kid and spending all day sitting on a dock, jumping from each of those scenes that they clearly, obviously filmed
They
all
had
at
to
once.
do it all together. Yeah.
They had to film that all at once, and that really makes
It's like,
insane.
okay, now I'm going to need you to look really confused about baseball.
Baseball. What is this?
Huh?
Yeah. No. Well,
We're
Patrick
lucky.
Stewart.
We're lucky that like the aliens didn't give up on him like when he described what the fuck baseball was.
Yeah, they look like he lost them for a minute there. They
It's
were
like the
like,
rules
I
don't- the
know,
rules don't
man.
matter.
Yeah, he saved it with that because he.
What were you saying before I said something about baseball?
Oh no, I was just saying like, with Patrick Stewart, he's a pro. He can handle that kind of like just say whatever and he'll just say it. But you're right. With the other people, they're like, what the
Dear
hell are we
old
doing?
Patty Stewart.
Another little tidbit about
Daryl Penny.
about Sirach Lofton and
toast of one.
Nog. The actor who played Nog was much older. He was just of slightly shorter stature. But
The guy's in his 50s now.
he and Sirach Lofton became really good friends.
Sirach Lofton's
and
my
they
age.
remain really good friends. In fact, they have a podcast together.
Wow.
That I think is worth checking out. I forget what it's called. I should know that. But anyway,
Is it a callback to like DS9, the name of the podcast?
I forget it's called the Seventh something. It's driving me nuts. I'll put it in the show notes. But-
penis.
Yes, it's the seventh penis. But
seventh
Sirach Lofton's playing Jake. He's playing Nog, and then they are hanging out, and they're acting as friends, and they ended up becoming real friends. And Sirach Lofton said he didn't know for like most of the first season that this guy was like in his 20s. That he ended up becoming friends with. I mean, he was he was still a young guy, but he wasn't,
Right.
13 or whatever.
So wait, how old was Sirach then around then?
I'd have to look at. He was pretty darn young though.
He's my age, actually. Same year as
Oh wow,
me.
so he was like,
yeah, he must have been like
So
13,
good-
14 or something.
Yeah, so that is a little like
He was
it's not-
born in August of 70.
I mean, in any other circumstance, I guess it would be kind of strange that they would be hanging out, but in that circumstance, no, it's just fun. They always have like the future has awesome pictures. Like, so in TNG, they always had those cups with the wide bases on them. You remember those cups?
Yes.
I just remember the scene with
Yeah.
You can buy those on the StarTrek.com site, I think.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
I remember Picard had a picture that had a wide base to it. I'm sorry, that was completely
No, they have
off topic, but I just
the
know
the
just remember seeing
glassware
those, like
in
such
Star
a great
Trek is
idea.
amazing. Well, Deep Space Nine has particularly good glassware. I love the Kanar glasses, the Kanar bottles. You know that Cardassian syrupy liquor.
Oh, right.
That does sound. Yeah.
I remember reading something about like how they found those bottles and just sort of randomly they bought a lot of bottles at some flea market.
A lot of
And then they
bottles.
decided, okay, these are going to be Kanar bottles, and then they tried to go find more, and they couldn't find them. So they're like, okay, we got this thing for like $2, and now we're going to have to pay lots of money to
man.
manufacture more of them.
Lots of
Aaron
money.
Eisenberg, that's who played
yeah.
Nog.
Yeah, Aaron Eisenberg. He's really really interesting guy. In
He was born in 1969.
in
69,
So he was
dude.
an old man now.
Yeah. Well, I think he has some kidney issues too. I think he has
Oh,
a
that's a bummer.
GoFundMe or Patreon to try
Oh,
to
word, yeah.
raise money for some of that stuff.
He says he got a kidney transplant at the age of 17.
Well, and he's another example.
That's why
of-
he's all
of,
short and
You know,
stuff.
you meet him very
Oh,
briefly in this show, and Daniel, sent that funny cartoon before, but it's where Nog goes from literally being a thief and in jail
Yeah.
in the first episode to being at various points. Not only, he's shown in the future as a captain. That's an amazing arc as well, and he's a completely tertiary plot point character in this
Yeah.
first episode.
Well, it's kind of interesting how they can do that with certain. Well, I don't want to get off in the weeds on other shows, but like on Breaking Bad, wasn't Jesse supposed to be just written off after a few
He
episodes?
was supposed to die in the first season.
and then they turned. Now he has a whole movie.
Yeah, and that happens. I think the characters are interesting or the actors are interesting.
Well, also with the Battlestar Galactica, with the character on New Caprica, the guy who's left behind with the other Cylon.
Yeah, and he ends up having his own plot line.
Cylon
Yeah.
and Garfunkel.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that one. But no, weren't they originally? The fans liked him so much that
Yeah.
they're like, keep him.
Yeah, he was sacrificing himself, but then it ended up in the miniseries. He sacrificed himself. I think wasn't that it. And then like once the show
Yeah.
started, they
Yeah, he
decided to, like,
he
actually
gave
have
up his
him-
seat so Gaius Baltar could get on the thing, and he was just kind of a regular guy, and they show him doing stuff. But then he turns out to be like the father of all of.
Well, I mean, speaking of Battlestar Galactica, I think it's very easy to argue that
Mm-hmm.
Deep Space Nine and the storytelling that it evolved into very quickly laid the groundwork for things like Battlestar Galactica.
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
And then later, some other of what we consider the prestige serialized drama. There, you can give credit to a few shows, but Deep Space Nine is definitely up there.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of a show. That
what
started
else would you
doing
give
that.
credit to? I mean, like that came out around that era for
Well, and
serialized.
Babylon 5 had a relatively.
I never watched
serialized-
Babylon 5. Is
but
that
it
good?
had
It was weird.
It's weird.
Is it
some
worth
people-
watching?
Yeah, I mean it's tricky. It's a tricky thing to say because it's definitely high quality storytelling. the issue with I find
You
it
should
very
watch
difficult.
that Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah,
Is that a
that's a
good,
good
show?
one.
I've heard that's
Yeah.
what about Firefly? Is that a good
Firefly's
show?
amazing, and there's
it's
only one
cool.
season.
That's a good one.
Is that where? But
worth
they
it.
have a
Firefly's
movie. They
amazing.
made a movie later, right?
Yeah, it's just 12 episodes in a movie. I think.
The
That's
movie
it.
is-
Oh, okay.
It's
Wha-
nonsense.
That's easy. It's like watching
Watch the
Faulty
show.
Towers.
So okay, but does the movie? I don't want to get off in the. I knew I shouldn't have brought up other shows, but does the movie for Firefly wrap up what happens?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's cool.
A little,
Okay.
Clumsily.
a little
enough,
clumsily.
at least
Yeah.
enough that you're satisfied
Yeah.
because there's a cliffhanger
But
they ended on, right?
Firefly has.
That's why I never watched it.
It has serialized elements, but it's not as serialized as modern shows, and I would argue not even as serialized as Deep Space Nine became.
What about
Partly because Firefly didn't have the time to develop this.
what about
story.
Stargate? All those shows. I never watched any of
Stargate
those.
was more episodic. Stargate was all about being
Stargate.
episodic.
What do you? What's funny?
No,
Dan's
no,
laughing.
I just thought it. I'm sorry. I didn't want to. I shouldn't have.
Say it.
I just thought it was funny because you kept saying I don't want to get off on a tangent on these, but then you keep bringing up
Yeah.
new shows.
Yeah. What about Gilligan's Island?
Have you ever seen True Blood?
Yeah. Right.
I didn't. I wasn't mad. I just thought it was just funny.
Better Call Saul is coming. Yeah.
I like that one.
Yeah, that's a great show. Okay, well, anyway, so back to Deep Space
I
Nine.
guess because we got to wrap it up in a second here, but
Wrap it up.
I'll make one comment, and then we should put out there what are things that were either sort of goofy, funny, didn't like. How do you think this ranks to other episodes? We'll go through that in a second, but the first thing is just to wrap up the story. I really found it interesting after the whole, Cisco, that they keep asking, why do you exist here? Why do you exist here? And he comes to, as Dan noted, he comes to accept. He says, yes, I'm existing here. That's crazy. What am I doing? And at the end, he affirmatively decides in that conversation with Picard, or, he asserts that he now exists here as in Deep Space Nine. He's choosing to give it a try, and it's not even like mega positive necessarily. It's not like some like revelation per se. It's more like, okay, shit, I've got to give this a try, and so I'm going to stick with this mission.
There was something I wanted to mention that I was thinking about when I watched the show last night. Like, you know how Picard is so thrown off, like Dan was pointing out earlier, like when Cisco says, I was at, this battle.
Yeah, it reminded me of that mortified like feeling I have like when I got like blackout drunk the night before, and then like I wake up and I'm talking to someone, they're
Like mortified by what you did, yeah.
and that look like,
Like,
oh
that
my
was you?
god,
It's because
I
you're
did
you're
that.
not consciously thinking about it, and then you're like, oh yeah, I vaguely remember
and so,
doing
like,
that.
look he gave, where he curled up with the corner of his mouth a little bit, like, oh,
Well, it
no.
made me-
It's just kind of like, but he couldn't like, he couldn't.
This is another one of them families I killed.
Well, I
Yeah,
thought,
right.
well,
I was like, oh man, I feel
my point
that,
about
buddy.
that scene is that it made me it made his performance in the movie First Contact more believable, that he's like he's
Yeah.
carrying this weight, because in a way you're kind of like
Yeah,
thinking,
I thought it was great for Picard's character. That
I agree.
scene, it's
Yeah.
a lot. It actually did it, and even though it
'Cause-
wasn't the focus, I thought it was great that it like made him look like.
'Cause it's like, why would
put
he-
him in a position less than sort of pristine?
yeah, because there's all this stuff like boiling below the surface with Picard, and it's
Right.
because there's certain things in with characters where you're like, in Back to the Future, where Marty McFly is like the chicken
Marty,
thing.
you made it.
Like everybody else on Star Trek was like, oh, okay, Picard, you're all right. We knew you were just kidnapped by
Right,
the
But
yeah,
he's
police.
still,
exactly.
but in a way you're
they
like,
didn't have their families killed.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
They didn't like
He's still good old
grasp
Captain Picard.
grasp at their bodies, at their wife's lifeless body.
the line must be drawn here.
Well, Patrick, what you were saying about. So Cisco never like came to some revelation with the prophets. The only time you really get a confirmation with that actually is with Picard at the end when he talks to Picard again. And interestingly enough, he interrupts Picard again. Like the first time he interrupted him, he's like, "I'll do my job and I'll start." Blah, 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 blah. And then Picard's like, "Well, I don't know if you're not ready." And he goes, "I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm ready." So, but he's a little disrespectful of Picard on both.
Exactly like
He's like, "Come on, come on,
like,
come on, come on!
I'm gonna do it.
I'm gonna do it, man.
I'm gonna do it great.
I'm gonna do a great job. Gonna kick some ass in space." But I just thought he was disrespectful in both parts. But anyway, but the point being
Yeah,
is that,
I
but,
think so.
but he's just that's just his character. But no, but what you're saying, like that's actually the only real confirmation we get, because I think they had to probably throw that in there to be like, yeah, in case you were wondering, in case yes, he is staying and that kind of stuff. So I don't know. And it was nice to wrap up the thing with Picard, so they didn't leave on totally like shitty terms.
So
yeah, well, I
what-
thought Picard. It ended well with Picard. I mean,
Yeah,
like,
yeah, oh yeah, it
Where
did. No, it did. Yeah,
Yeah, because he kind of they was giving each other
The
respect.
only, but the only
Mad respect.
I will point out, even though this is not my perspective, I think it worked very well. But I will point out, just from an objective viewpoint, I'm Picard. This guy is kind of a dick to me. Kind of brings up like a shitty part of my past where I was effectively being raped. I was like
Yeah.
body and mind raped by an alien robot creep species. And in that process, they stole my brain thoughts, killed some families. He's pissed off about it. I didn't really want to have that brought up.
And you're victim shaming
So
me
that's
on
fucking
this one.
awkward. And then he's all like, on top of that, he's all like, fuck this place. This is the middle of nowhere. I was perfectly happy on Mars putting together spaceships and shit to fight the fucking Borg who killed my wife.
Yeah.
And you pulled me off of this shit to go in this fucking dead end nowhere with a bunch of these religious lunatics.
And now all of a sudden,
Fuck
just because
you.
it's like there's a wormhole here, you're all
Yes,
excited
because,
to stay.
and
yeah.
Picard is Picard. That's the point I was going to make. Is Picard is all like, you've made this into it's soon going to be a hub of commerce and science and politics.
It's now you want me to do you a favor. It's like, no, I should transfer your ass out
It's
of
like,
here.
yeah,
you
this is
dick.
kind of cool now.
That's true. That's a good point.
Yeah, I wonder if the real military would work that way. On the other hand, Cisco did demonstrate himself to be success. I mean, not successful in his mission per se, but he got some shit done, as we said. However, it's not yet. They haven't stressed how important he is yet. They've laid down the tracks that the prophets are really interested in him, but at this stage it's more like he has been able to make contact and chill with them and talk all sorts of goofy fucking trippy mushroom nonsense and like calm their asses down.
Yeah.
But it's not.
Chill them bitches
We're
out.
not at the stage yet where it's like, no, tough luck. You literally have to deal with Cisco, and that's what Starfleet, of course, will find out later. Is that and they get uncomfortable with that, where they're like, wait a second, what if we want to transfer your ass somewhere else? Now we can't because of these locals are like really into you religious style.
Yeah. No, that's some wild shit. What can I say? Were there any other last? What was
Well,
that? You had some kind of thing you wanted
What
us
are some
to
things
discuss.
that annoyed you, if any, or were weird, or were mistakes?
Wow.
So, two things with O'Brien. First of all, what the fuck is an ODN access? That was one thing. He's like, O'Brien couldn't find the ODN access near the beginning of the episode when they get on the bridge, whatever. But anyway, so there's that whole.
I think it stands for. I honestly think it stands for Optical Data Network. I bet you $1 million that's what it stands for.
Sure, that sounds.
I think I read that
sounds,
in the manual.
So I'll buy that. So when they did that whole sort of heist or whatever with Odo, like being a bag, he was a bag full of. He was the bag. He can't imitate humans, but he can be a crinkly, weird bag. But so like I guess the idea was they brought him in and put him in their ship, and he got out and he like fucked up their ship so they couldn't detect that they were
I think that was the idea.
It seemed a little bit.
It was underwritten.
Yeah, it was exactly. It was kind of like all this complex shit was happening. You thought it was gonna be all fancy, and it's like, oh, he just kind of.
I felt like something was like was left on the editing room
Yeah,
floor.
right. Yeah,
It was like
And it's
one
like-
extra scene.
It's like, was
Yes,
everybody
yes.
in on it? Was Corkin on it too?
Pretty sure.
Probably.
It was
But
difficult
it's
to
kinda
tell.
Like,
Yeah.
In retrospect, he had to have been because you saw him all like looking at that latinum. But
Yeah.
he wouldn't have given that up so easily. He would have wanted them to stay and like gamble more. So I think you'd have to presume he was in on it.
So and then
Because they was like, this is.
And he's all like, "Get them that specific bag."
Right, right.
and so
That's true.
And then this is more of a nitpick, I guess. In that same scene where O'Brien's all having trouble with the transporter to transport Odo, he's like, "I've never done this before on a card." It's like, why didn't you fucking practice a little bit
Yeah,
before you
right.
went through with this plan? And when you kicked it, it worked. Whatever. That's just whatever. But and then he had the same issue though later on when Kira was doing that plan against Gul Jasad, and she was like, "Fire 6 photon torpedoes." He's like, "That's all we have."
Great
And it's
poupon.
like,
I always-
it's like you
I'm
had
not
an hour.
retarded.
It's like you had an hour to work this plan out. You could have at least run that one.
Well,
by
I also
him,
thought that like, why didn't they shoot 4 photon torpedoes and
Well,
just kept 2 in case? I mean, wouldn't it be
right.
nice
It would,
to?
it would have the same effect.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, like,
Well,
at least
it is an interesting question
Or
because
two.
let's work.
right.
Let's like take a quick. We're gonna don't worry, audience. We're gonna end the podcast soon, but we're gonna take a slight detour. So let's go through it. One torpedo.
Yeah.
That don't work, right?
Right.
2 feeble.
Yeah.
2's probably also like if I'm the Cardassian, there were what 3 or 4 ships there.
Yeah, I'd say 2 is not enough.
2
They
is
have
a little
goofy-looking
too little weak.
ships too. By the way.
3, but you want to be dramatic, so I say 4. I say 4.
3, you're saying I'm warning you, and they would laugh. They would be like, "Haha, they shot 3."
But you shoot 4, I think that's enough.
See, I think Kira's logic. I don't disagree with you. I think Kira
maybe
being
5.
Yeah, Kira was like, you know what? Blow our load because what's the point of those other two?
See, here's the thing. She obviously knew that 6 was enough, but if she had had 7, she would have shot 7. So I'm thinking.
Man, see, you're assuming that, but think about it this way: the math. We've already determined, right? We've already determined.
I think she would have shot 7.
We've already determined that 3 is problematic, right? So if you shoot 3, it's kind of weak sauce.
Wimp, yeah.
Boop, boop, boop.
Okay,
then you've only got 3 left. So what are you going to do? Be like, okay, that didn't work. Boop, boop, boop. 3 more.
Yeah.
Now 4, you're right. 4 is great. 4 is like fuck. They're shooting 4 at
You got
us.
shot
Why
with
would they
4.
What the fuck?
Why
But
would they-
then,
why would
but,
they-
but then you've only got 2 left. So what do you follow that up with?
Yeah,
2?
right, yeah.
So you might as well shoot those 2 because they're not
Right.
actually going to help you.
I'm just saying it'd be nice to have just say fuck it if you know they're coming at you. At least you got 2 photon torpedoes you
What
can
if they
use for
shot?
something.
What if they shot 1 and then 2 and then 3?
Whoa, that would have been that crazy. man.
That would use them all up, but give
And
them
actually
3
shot them
volleys.
at someone.
And that would
Instead of
have
just across their nose.
and that would have
That's the
the
thing.
double 3 count
Instead
thing
of
'cause,
cross her nose,
you know,
not
Not
up
up
it.
it.
you know, it
Shoot it up their nose.
and it would have the rule of 3s. You know, it's like 3's the number, the magic number. 3 strikes and you're out. And it's
Transporter-
like 1, 2,
transporter
and 3.
room 3.
Anyways, my point was, you're right about that. My point was more like, why didn't they run that by O'Brien that she was going to shoot all of the photon torpedoes? Like, you had an hour to do this. Were you doing this all by the seat of your pants? Like, O'Brien wasn't. They didn't fill him up enough on the situation. I thought that
Fill him up.
with cum. I thought that Bajoran, the Bajoran hologram fountain staircase was badass. I want one of those.
Yes.
That was pretty awesome.
I've always been blown away by that.
Yeah.
Also, just the matte painting of Bajor when he goes down. The first matte painting with there's like a weird
beautiful.
fast little car goes
Yeah,
across.
that's cool.
It's like the opposite
really
of
weird city.
It's much better than the scene. I mean, it was a good
counter Farpoint
Well-
where they're shooting the same in a shack for like 10 minutes.
And it's a little model.
Yeah.
It's not even a big model.
I
It's a
think-
little tiny
It
model.
was, it was more effective though than the scene. Like, the scene itself was good, but the actual effect of when they went on the surface inside the wormhole, where Cisco saw all the bullshit and
Yeah.
Jadzia saw like a nice idyllic land. The stormy stuff, they didn't really like the actual effect of the people walking with the stormy background. It
wasn't terrifying?
It wasn't. It just wasn't really.
It wasn't that great.
It wasn't believable.
That's
you
true.
know,
It
but
could have been
anyway.
more. It could. Yeah.
But I mean,
no,
but the idea of it was really sorry. The idea of it was.
How about you, Jesse? You had any?
Wait, one last question.
Dan,
though.
Dan has a question.
One last question. The tier of the prophet, is that TIER or TEAR? What is
TEAR?
It's like a tier. It's not like a tier.
What do you mean?
Dude,
tier.
that's incredible.
Pure One imports.
Well, like a tier, like, you know, it's on a tier. It's on a higher. It's like on a. There's
Higher
different
plane.
tiers.
Word. Yeah.
Dude, you're on a higher plane for asking that.
There you think. That's all I got.
Whoa.
Mic drop.
You are on another tier.
It's like Jenga, but
In
with
another realm.
orbs.
With orbs. 9 orbs.
Okay, Jesse.
10,000 years.
What are you? Anything? Any goof 'em ups? Any flibble flobs? Garble narb narbs?
Not
Zip dibbles?
particularly, but there's a scene from Quark's place where there's this guy playing this funny instrument and it looks like it's like
Yeah.
it's like a big pile of rocks
Yeah,
and it looks
yeah.
like one of those Zen fountains.
I was thinking about that too.
It's
That
all
was a
going
cool.
like, bing, bing,
I mean, it probably was a Zen.
I was thinking about the
Yeah.
design. People who designed that. That was pretty
It was,
awesome.
but yeah,
There's
that
a
was
lot of
cool
thought to
part.
it, yeah.
And the wormhole looks pretty cool.
Oh
too.
yeah, the wormhole. I was going to say that. I thought that looked amazing. That really
yeah.
holds
It's
up.
still,
It
it
did.
still looks
It did. The
amazing.
only thing
Yeah.
that looked
Yeah.
not so great was the Cardassian when Gul Dukat's ship was like going through it. That kind of looked a little cheesy, but I liked it. But the actual wormhole effects themselves
they
were
have
really
silly
awesome.
ships. The Cardassians have silly
well,
ships.
and it's just a look like a little model. It didn't. It's just funny. But no, what you're saying though.
But
the effects
so-
of the wormhole were amazing.
But some
They
of
were
that
awesome.
stuff, like, well, I thought that, like,
Pretty
in the
cool.
early '90s, if they really, like, they weren't drowning in technology
No,
like
and
they
I
are
like-
there was
now.
like a
And I-
watery
so, like,
bit
yeah.
in the background.
Well,
they were
and
still
there was, like,
using
a
models.
But yeah, exactly. Like, well, if you look at Terminator 2, I think that movie stands up to the test of time because they didn't have so much CGI.
Well, and I
Same
agree.
Jurassic Park is the
And-
same.
And is it? Yeah.
And I want
need
to
watch it
clarify
again.
that I think it looked really good, and I'd prefer those models to like some like one thing. Babylon 5 is the CGI was kind of shitty, but I like those models in the DS. I like that look to it. It's kind of hokey, but it looks cool.
Because
Yeah.
DS9 ends
Like
up using
Empire Strikes Back.
they use CGI to really good effect later on in the later seasons, but
What did I say? I meant to say the show
no. Babylon 5
Babylon
is right.
5, that
That's
was
the
the
one
word,
that
yeah.
it did look goofy.
Yes.
Once CGI got better, like one issue that Discovery has, in some people's perspective, is they've got all this stuff they can do with the CGI that's amazing. It like looks gorgeous. But then they can do it too much sometimes.
Yeah.
Not always. They're not like they're not as bad as some other people. But sometimes it's like, all right, yeah, I'm starting to vomit here because of how much ridiculousness.
But so the effect of the opening of and closing of the wormhole was awesome. It like closed and there's this like blue halo that's like flying out, and like it was a lot of thought put into it. And then inside the wormwormle, like just the general stuff. Yeah, that was. It's always awesome, like the look of that shit. And it's like really creative.
All right, Daniel. Any disappointments with the episode?
Honestly, no, because I don't see. I can't decide if it's just because I just watched The Cage, Where No Man Has Gone Before, and especially Encounter at Farpoint. I can't tell if I'm just comparing it to Encounter at Farpoint, which was in 1987, and then there's like 6 more years of, you know what I mean, storytelling. And see, I just don't think it's necessarily fair, but I can't. I think I was just comparing it to the.
It's not about fairness, you know. It's
there was nothing that I was
improve over time. I think.
I thought it was
it's
excellent.
the best pilot.
I thought so too. I think it's from what I remember. Unless I can't. I've seen the others. I've seen Enterprise.
There
and
are
I've seen,
other good pilots, and there are some other stingy pilots.
Yeah,
I thought it was really good. I thought it was fantastic.
no, because honestly, from just memory alone, I thought that maybe Voyager might have been on par, if not maybe better than Emissary. And there's no way after watching Emissary.
I haven't even
It's so
seen
much
that shit
better.
in-
Yeah.
And we'll talk about Voyager next week because there's a lot to love in the Voyager pilot.
Well, I remember really liking it when I first saw it on the air, like the Voyager pilot.
I think it's a really interesting arc in that, you know,
On the
there's
air.
TOS in the cage, and they're in the 60s, and so they're bound by the budgets and the technology and all that stuff, but still very solid, very interesting entries, very interesting stories. Then you jump forward to Encounter at Farpoint. It's edging more into quote unquote modern TV production, but as we discussed last week, there's a bunch of issues there.
Yeah, and it was better than I thought it would be. But then with
it's not
Emissary, I was
bad.
expecting just to watch it with an open mind, and I was like, "Wow, I would watch this again."
Yeah,
They were able to
maybe
successfully set
another
up. They were
time
able to
soon.
successfully set up characters in the situation, but also tell it and
And-
weave it in. Or what
Yeah,
is
I
it?
will watch it again. I
They
mean,
were-
just
they were
for
to tell
pleasure.
a compelling story at the same time.
It's
is what I
very
was trying to say.
fair. It's very fair to say that they had the benefit of already having been in production on TNG for 5 years
Yeah,
at this
that's
point.
true.
Exactly.
And having advances in the technology, both within the Star Trek realm, like literally the people who are doing the work, and in the industry as a whole. But I think that it doesn't matter that that's the case. It's just, I think it is, to my mind, is certainly the best pilot that we've watched so
Yeah,
far.
I agree.
Having watched all the others, I still think it's probably my favorite of them for all the reasons you suggested. Particularly, just it's amazing writing, and I think that's something that they could have done on TNG. They could have had better writing, and in TNG, as Daniel was alluding to, as I guess both of you guys were, it's. They kept going back and forth between being like, we're going to introduce you to a character, now we're going to have some plot, and they weren't always compatible. Whereas in Deep Space Nine, they are completely together the entire
they weaves together
time.
For real though.
That baseball player that said aggressive, adversarial. Don't you think that would make like a really good like headache medicine commercial?
Aggressive.
Adversarial. Yeah. So like DS9 headache medicine. I don't know.
It is linear.
Yeah.
What is a headache?
Yeah, right. Headache.
I haven't got
that's
time for the
yes,
pain
that's
in
perfect.
my linear existence.
What is a headache?
What if you had
Exactly.
What if you were a non-linear creature and you had a headache
Just forever.
for infinity? Not even forever. For just
Just all the time.
the
You wouldn't
universal
know the
time
difference.
loop.
How
You
did
wouldn't
they-
know.
how are they-
What if we have
fair
headaches
point.
now? What if we're in serious pain and we don't even know it?
How are they able to? How are they able to catch
I think
on?
that's true.
How are they able to catch on to the idea of termination if they didn't understand linearity? I don't know.
I don't know. That's
I don't know.
That's all I got.
who are these non-corporeal beings?
It's crazy.
Life is.
What are you gonna do with all
She
this
had
stuff?
she had linear hands.
George, the hands.
They were linear.
The hands, George.
They were just too linear. Okay, so
They went from one to the other.
any last comments? Otherwise, I think we'd wind it
No,
up.
I'm all done. Great episode.
Great episode. All right, next week on It's Got Star Trek, we're going to talk about Voyager,
Voyager.
Caretaker, the pilot,
He's a linear exister.
where we go back.
Who's he taking care of? He's a linear existence.
He's one of those linear existers.
He could do a whole. I bet he could do a whole special on non-linear. These people, they are they eating breakfast when they should be eating lunch?
I had to get up in the morning at 10 o'clock at night, half an hour before I went to bed.
They have dinner for breakfast.
They're eating up, they're throwing, they're pooping. Who knows?
At this, how he goes to IHOP. He can literally get anything on the menu.
The poop
At
goes
any
into
time.
their butt, and the food comes out of their mouth. All right, that one got Jesse's having some problems now. All right, great. So next week, Voyager. And that's going to be interesting.
They're born at their funeral.
It started a network. It started the United Paramount Network.
Oh, that's right.
The UPN network, one of the
Oh,
most
motherfucker.
successful 6th or 7th networks of all time.
It's good stuff.
UPN King's Dominion?
6 or 7.
Yeah, King's Dominion. We can talk about
I
because
think
that was the
they
time.
bought that shit later on.
Hanna-Barbera?
No, I
to-
think it was
At
around
that-
the same
at that time?
It was Hanna-Barbera to Paramount to UPN. I don't know.
Paramount.
Paramount is you.
Paramount you in the butt.
But Voyager, so Deep Space Nine, one last thing to say about it in relation to Voyager, which we're going to talk about next week, was that Deep Space Nine started 2 years before TNG ended. Then TNG ended, and then Voyager started up immediately the following year of TNG. So Deep Space Nine never once was on the air by itself, and probably that's what saved it. Because if you look at the first 2 seasons, which I love the first 2 seasons of Deep Space Nine, I even like the Allamaraine business. That I really
How
don't
about
mind.
the third Shap or whatever, the game players?
Yeah,
where you
yeah.
lived in the game world.
Yeah, that's the Allamaraine.
Oh, that's the same one.
The
Oh.
third. I'm totally
Let's
cool.
talk about
I
the same
was
thing.
so ready to hate that when I watched that episode not too long
forget
ago.
that's
I
what it was.
so
I was
looking forward to
entertained by
hating
it,
it,
yeah.
and I was like, this is a TOS episode. That's what it is. It's on Deep Space Nine, but it's a
Yeah.
TOS episode.
And I like TOS, yeah.
Yeah, it's just we weren't used to seeing that. But anyway, but those 2 seasons have a different flavor. And once they got figured out that the producers seemed not to be paying attention because they were winding up TNG and starting doing Generations and then starting up Voyager
at all at the same
and it had to,
time,
and that had to carry a whole fucking network. It wasn't in syndication like Deep Space Nine was. They were just like, all right, here you're making money, so here's your budgets, make your show, and they were able to within certain constraints do a lot of really creative stuff. So if you haven't seen Deep Space Nine, go watch the whole thing and then get back to us. You can email us at something and contact us on Twitter.
It's got everything.
At something. Oh yeah, it's got everything.com.
This is the 3rd official episode.
of this series of the
Oh,
Star Trek of the
a
It's Got
word.
Star Trek.
I was actually in the first episode because, I'm non-linear.
Non-linear.
Because you know how I wasn't in the first episode with you guys? I actually was.
What we'll have to do an addendum. We'll do bonus episodes where we'll get Daniel
mix you
and
in. We'll do it in
Jimmy. Our history professor. He wants to chat about some of this stuff too.
Yeah, we got to
But
get him
he's-
in on this.
He's currently traveling the world. So
He's
he
on a
couldn't be
Star
with us.
Trek.
What's more important than this?
I think he's actually in
that-
Italy.
He's
but
in Italy.
Isn't that what? Isn't that?
Dude, I think he should come back
isn't that
from
what,
Italy.
What That'll Do Pig guy said?
he will eventually come back from Italy.
No, but for this podcast,
Where
for the
in
Voyager
Italy is
podcast, I think he should just say, fuck it, I'm getting on a plane.
Isn't the That'll Do
We'll
Pig?
recall him.
The That'll Do Pig guy said they're on some kind of Star Trek.
Yes, James Cromwell.
Yeah.
That'll do, pig.
Kind of Star Trek? You're all
That's where Jimmy is.
astronauts.
Jimmy's on some kind of Star Trek.
That's frustrating. Although, when they say the title in Star Trek, I don't mind in certain things, but in Star Trek, when they say the title of the show or the
Right.
episode it wears me out.
Yeah.
It makes me
I
really
hear ya.
uncomfortable.
Emissary. You must be the emissary.
That one doesn't bother me as much because it's one word.
Yeah, that's true.
But
The original
but
motion
it's,
picture.
It's getting in there.
We'll always have Paris. I hear you.
All right. Well, we love you.
This was wonderful.
We'll see you next
This
week.
was the best podcast ever.
This is the best we've ever done.
Oh, the next one will be even better. 'Cause it'll be more controversial. There might be. We all like this one,
It'll
but
be
there
a-
might be
Yeah.
some more.
Oh, there was
differences
there
of
was
opinion
everybody
next
dug
week.
this. Yeah, there was no like.
Hey, I like this part, and you like that part. And
I'm
everybody
gonna
likes
have to
it
watch
all.
the next one like a whole
Bashir's a
bunch
piece
of
of shit.
times.
Watch it like 10 times.
7 times.
9. I'll watch it
9.
9
I watched it
times.
9 times.
9 times.
Ducat's an asshole.
Yeah.
That's a good way to end it. Ducat is an asshole.
Perennial asshole.
He was an asshole in the first place.
The hell? Opaka.
Hey!
I'm sorry. It's just that this... Jen?
Yes?
Jennifer?
I'm sorry. Did we meet last night at George's party?
George? Jennifer? Wait a minute. This is impossible.
Are you okay?
I know this place. This is Gilgo Beach, where we met.
We met here before?
I was carrying 3 lemonades. The sand was burning my feet. And I stopped here to... Ow! Do you realize how incredible this is? Oh. No, of course you don't. Jennifer, have a lemonade.